Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back, way back, to a city filled with fog, filth and fortune, where the streets echo with the clatter of hooves and the cries of fishmongers. That's right, you're heading into medieval London. But be warned, this isn't some sleepy postcard version with quaint thatched roofs and harp music in the background. It's loud, it smells awful, and you're probably not going to survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and time in the comments. I want to know who else is up this late wondering what it was like to earn a crust in the year 1375. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on the edge of London Bridge, staring down at the swirling murky Thames, and your boots are already soaked. It's early morning, grey and cold, and the stench of river rot and chamber pot refuse wafts up from the banks like a bad omen. To your left, a row of timber-framed houses leans drunkenly toward the sky, windows shuttered tight. To your right, a toothless beggar mutters something indecipherable and offers to bless you. For a coin, of course. You have no coin. Welcome to your first day. London in the medieval period is bursting at the seams. Some 50,000 souls cram into narrow, twisting lanes that flood when it rains and bake in the summer stench. Everyone's busy, but not the checking emails and grabbing coffee kind of busy. It's more like survive the day or starve busy. The ground underfoot is a thick mash of mud, hay, manure, and something unidentifiably foul. You learn quickly to step high and keep your mouth closed. There are buildings, of course, grand cathedral, orals, stone halls, but most of the city is timber, daub and hope. Homes are slapped together from whatever's handy, often multiple stories high, the upper levels jutting out so far they nearly touch the buildings across the lane. They call it jettying, but to you it just looks like the city is trying to crush itself from above. On every street you hear the wheeze and creak of carts, the clank of smithy hammers, the yells of women selling eels. The noise never stops. You'd think you'd get used to it, but it just sort of sinks into your skull like the damp. You pick your way through the streets and realise that every inch of the city is an opportunity for someone else. The man sharpening knives on a foot-pedalled wheel has probably been at it since dawn. The boy selling pies, possibly pigeon, possibly rat, has already barked himself hoarse. Nobody's rich here. Even the lords behind their iron gates spend half their time worrying that their estates are about to be seized by someone higher up the ladder. It's like London is this endless climbing wall coated in grease. Now and then you spot people who look almost clean. A merchant in a fine wool cloak swishes past you, eyes forward, ignoring the barefoot girl tugging at his sleeve. His fingers sparkle with rings, and his purse makes a tempting bulge under his belt. You're not thinking of robbing him, yet, but you notice how the eyes of a nearby boy follow that purse like a hawk tracks a mouse. The city runs on desperation and guts, and yes, sometimes theft. You hear a bell, a big one. It's not church time, at least not yet. This one's more practical. It tells the workers it's time to start. Already you can see the city unfolding. Bakers haul their heavy trays to stalls, apprentices in rough linen tunics rush out with buckets and bundles, and tradesmen throw open shutters to the world. One man, red-faced and sweating, carries a basket of leather scraps over his shoulder. You smell the sour stink of tannins before he's even near. And across the lane a butcher swats flies from hanging meat with a pine bough like it's some kind of ritual dance. Here's a fun fact. In medieval London, the noise wasn't just annoying, it was status. If your trade was loud, visible and constant, it meant you were earning. That's why hammering, shouting, clanging and bell ringing weren't just tolerated, they were expected. There were even city ordinances allowing certain trades to be noisy during specific hours. No one cared if you had a headache. Sound meant business. And yet, as lively as it is, there's a sense of fragility in the air. You can see it in the way people glance at the sky, wondering if the next rain will flood their shop or if a stray fire will leap from one thatched roof to another. You can feel it in the way a child clutches her bread roll like it's treasure. There's no safety net here. If you don't work, you don't eat. If you get sick, you pray and hope you don't end up in a plague pit. And if you make one powerful enemy, even by accident, you might just disappear. Historians still debate how livable medieval cities were for the average person. Some argue that despite the harshness, a skilled worker could actually make a decent, if humble, living. Others paint a bleaker picture of constant toil, bad sanitation, and widespread hunger. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in the mushy middle. London was survivable, but it never stopped testing you. And now, standing there in your flea-bitten cloak, with a growling stomach and no clear plan for the day, you understand what that means. There's opportunity, sure, but it's hidden under 10 layers of grime and guarded by guilds, gatekeepers, and sheer dumb luck. The best thing to do? Start walking. Follow the smell of bread, avoid the alley with the rats, and for heaven's sake, watch where you step. The city's waiting for you, but it's not going to be kind. You don't need a rooster to wake you up in medieval London. The city does that on its own, with a chorus of clattering carts, shouting vendors, and church bells that seem far too cheerful for how miserable your back feels after sleeping on straw. That's assuming, of course, you even found a place to sleep. And if you didn't, well, that's where things get tricky. Medieval London doesn't exactly have a Motel 6. Unless you're lucky, or rich, you're left scrambling for a roof every night, and roofs don't come cheap. Your first night, you wandered for hours under the flicker of torchlight, trying to avoid trouble. So East Ends took pity and let you sleep in the loft with the ale barrels. Others just slammed the door shut, already crammed with out-of-towners, merchants, or snoring soldiers with bad teeth and worse manners. You eventually curled up in a stable shed, squeezed between a nervous mule and a pile of hay that may or may not have once been dry. It smelled like every mistake you've ever made, but it was warm-ish. The housing situation, if you can even call it that, is brutal. Most people rent a room in someone else's house, usually a single smoky room stuffed with entire families, strangers, fleas, and possibly a goat. Privacy is a luxury no one can afford. Beds are shared, often by strangers. Yep, that's called hot bedding. You rent by the hour, not the night, and when your time's up, someone else climbs into your still warm spot. It's intimate in the worst possible way. Then there's the alehouse option. Not just for drinking, many alehouses double as informal shelters. You buy a cup of weak ale, safer than water honestly, and the landlord might let you crash on a bench near the hearth. If you're lucky, you might even get some barley mash from the bottom of the pot. But there's always the risk of drunken brawls, fire, or someone mistaking your foot for a chamber pot in the dark. Now, if you're looking to stay long term, you'll need to know your place on the social ladder. And let's just say you're currently underneath it. Rent in London is determined not by comfort, but by location and what you can stomach. The richer folk live near Cheapside and Cornhill, where the market noise is constant but profitable. You, however, drift toward the fringes, places like Southwark, just across the bridge, known for its brothels, bear-baiting pits, and general lawlessness. It's cheaper. It's also where people go when they don't want to be found. There's always the monastery guest houses, but unless you're a pilgrim with an excellent lie or a real reason to beg for shelter, good luck. The monks are picky, and you haven't bathed in a while. Still, some religious houses offer a corner of floor and a crust of bread if you help with chores. You scrub a few stone floors, sing a psalm badly, and get a meal and maybe a blanket for the effort. The downside, you have to wake up even earlier than usual, and avoid saying anything remotely sinful. Here's something odd. Medieval London didn't have a police force, but it did have neighbourhood tithings, groups of 10 men responsible for each other's behaviour. If one of them committed a crime, the others could be fined or punished. It's basically a forced buddy system, and if you're new in town, you're not in anyone's tithing. That makes you suspicious, maybe even dangerous. Strangers are looked at sideways. They assume you're a thief, a vagrant, or worse, a Welshman. Yeah, xenophobia runs deep here. Historians still squabble over whether medieval London had any kind of formal housing regulation. Some claim there were rudimentary laws about keeping thatched roofs trimmed or chimneys cleaned to prevent fire. Others argue that these rules were almost never enforced unless someone important got smoked out of their parlour. What we do know is that housing was a mess. Landlords were greedy, and most buildings were so rickety you could knock them over with a sneeze. And yet, despite all this, you start to see little flickers of domestic life. A woman sweeps out her doorway with a bunch of twigs. A child chases a wooden hoop down the alley. A man hums while shaving by a tin mirror in the window light. It's not comfortable, but it's home. For them. For you, it's a rotating cast of benches, hay bales, borrowed floor space, and one very questionable attempt at sleeping under a merchant's cart before being chased off by a dog, a very vocal dog. By your third night, you learn the golden rule of medieval lodging. Know someone. Friends and connections are everything. If you help the baker's boy carry flour sacks, maybe he lets you sleep on the oven room floor where it's warm. If you charm a washerwoman, maybe she lets you curl up beside the hearth while her kids stare at you like a raccoon in boots. No one has much, but if you earn their trust, or just their pity, you might snag a stable spot in their already crowded life. The fringe fact? Some homes actually had secret hiding holes for priests or political enemies. Yep, the good old priest hole. You won't be invited into one unless you're running from something or someone, and since you're just trying to find a bed, you don't want to end up in a hole in the wall. Yet, each night as the city winds down and the church bells toll compline, you begin that anxious ritual of finding shelter. It's not just about sleep, it's about safety, warmth, and not waking up to a boot in your ribs. You check your corners, watch your back, and wrap your cloak tighter against the chill. Somewhere in the alleys, a cat yowls. Somewhere in the taverns, someone's still laughing. You're exhausted, but you're learning. Slowly. And just as you drift off, wherever you manage to land, you hear the night watchman's voice drifting through the streets like a lullaby made of fog and soot. 10 of the clock, and all is well. You don't believe him. Not really. But for now, you let it be true. Your eyes open before the sun even tries. There's no gentle dawn chorus here, no birdsong, no golden light filtering in through gauzy curtains. Instead, it's a low grumble of cartwheels, a shrill shout from a baker's boy, and a dog barking like it's chasing the devil. Someone throws open a window overhead and dumps out a chamber pot with the casual grace of someone who's done this every morning for years. You flinch as it splashes near your boots. You start your day already needing a bath. Welcome to morning in medieval London. The city awakens like a kicked anthill. Chimneys cough to life. The streets, which never fully sleep, stir with a sudden urgency. Bakers and brewers are already hours into their work, and the smells wafting through the foggy air almost make you forget what you're stepping in. You follow the scent of warm bread, ears tuned to the clang of metal, and the first calls of merchants setting up stalls. If you want to make anything resembling a living here, you'll have to learn to love the morning, because it won't wait for you. You dodge a pair of oxen dragging a load of timber, nearly trip over a scrawny pig, and sidestep a wheelbarrow pushed by a grizzled man muttering prayers to St. Crispin. Everything moves in a chaotic rhythm, fast and fumbling like the city is permanently late for something. There's no coffee shop to refuel at, just a hope that maybe, just maybe, someone will let you scrape a bit of porridge from the bottom of a pot, or sell you a hunk of bread that's only slightly stale. No coin, no food, and you, lucky traveller, have exactly 0 coin. Still, you hustle toward the market district anyway, because that's where the action is. That's where the day begins in earnest. The great conduit in Cheapside, meant to distribute clean drinking water, is already surrounded by buckets and barrels, and women jostle for position, elbowing one another with the precision of people who've done this every day of their lives. The water flows, but so does the gossip, and while most of it is about spoiled meat and noisy neighbours, you overhear mention of a shipment of wool arriving today, an opportunity, if you're desperate and have a strong back, which you do, barely. You reach for a roll, any roll, porter, helper, cleaner, it doesn't matter. You hang around looking useful. Eventually someone bites. A fishmonger with arms like tree trunks snaps his fingers and gestures to a cart loaded with sloshing baskets. You carry, you get fed, he grunts. That's the best offer you've had in 2 days. The work is brutal. Your hands go numb, your shoulders scream, you're elbow deep in cold brine, and the air smells like a dare gone wrong. But you carry that basket like it's full of gold. And this is how it starts. Your first actual task. Your first exchange of labour for food. It's not glamorous. You're wet, sore, and have a scale stuck to your cheek. But by mid-morning, you've earned a heel of bread, a ladle of fish stew, and the fishmonger doesn't shove you when you ask to come back tomorrow. That's practically a handshake deal in medieval London. You might not starve today. Here's a strange little wrinkle. Timekeeping isn't really a thing yet. The city has church bells to mark canonical hours, matins, prime, terce, and so on, but there's no universal clock ticking in every shop. People live by routine sound and the sun. When the bells ring, you act. When the sun hits a certain angle on the wall of St. Paul's, it's time to head home. You're constantly guessing what time it is and always slightly wrong. You notice how others manage their mornings. Apprentices rush from shop to shop, sweeping doorstep, stacking goods, fetching water, and catching verbal abuse like it's part of the job description. Mothers haul toddlers on their hips while trying to haggle for leeks. Soldiers pass through with clanking armour and suspicious glances. A beggar with one eye tries to sell you a magic pebble that's clearly just a rock. No one slows down. If you stop, you're in the way. If you're in the way, you're a problem. Still, there are moments, fleeting ones, where something like peace settles in. A beam of sunlight finds its way between two buildings and lights up a puddle like stained glass. A boy sings a silly song about hedgehogs while chasing a goose through the street. A flower seller arranges her wilted goods with such care it could make you cry. The city, for all its mess, has soul. And as harsh as this life is, it's also undeniably alive. Scholars go back and forth about just how brutal this daily grind really was. Some argue that medieval workers enjoyed more free time than modern 9-to-5ers, especially around feast days and religious festivals. Others counter that if you weren't in a guild or working for the church, you were scrambling constantly, barely scraping by. The answer, of course, is that it depended on your trade, your gender, your luck, and whether your neighbours liked you. The only thing everyone agrees on: if you didn't hustle, you didn't eat. By midday you've run errands, lifted crates, and learned that the fishmonger's name is Edric. He doesn't smile much, but he grunts less disapprovingly than he did this morning. Progress. A baker tosses you a scrap of hard crust after you help stack wood for his oven. A washerwoman lets you warm your hands near her steaming washtub. These small kindnesses, they add up. They mean you're not just passing through anymore. You're beginning to sink your fingers into the grime and rhythm of the place. As the bells ring again, this time for sext, you lean against a wall and watch the city swirl. You're tired, but it's a different kind of tired. Not the weariness of wandering, but the curse ache that comes from having pulled your weight. Just a little. London hasn't crushed you yet. And in this city, that's practically a win. You're still wiping dried fish guts from your sleeves when a kid about 10 years old hurls a turnip at your shoulder and shouts, "Apprentice or nothing," before disappearing into a maze of alleyways. Rude, yes, but also not wrong. In medieval London, if you're serious about making a living, or at least not dying in the street, you need structure, stability, a trade, and that usually means one thing: apprenticeship. You may be sore and smelly, but you've now reached that unavoidable milestone where you have to find someone willing to teach you a craft and basically own you for the next 7 to 10 years. Apprenticeship isn't a casual gig. You don't just walk up to a blacksmith and say, "Mind if I try hammering stuff?" No, it is a legal agreement, a contract backed by the guilds. You get food, shelter and training. They get your unpaid labour and the right to yell at you whenever they feel like it. And boy, do they feel like it often. The process starts with a master. Not a wizard, sorry, but a skilled tradesman who's respected by his guild and trusted to raise another human without turning them into a complete disaster. Blacksmiths, coopers, bakers, butchers, goldsmiths. Each trade has its own hierarchy and rules. Masters take apprentices not out of charity, but for practical reasons. You're a pair of hands that cost nothing and work long hours. In return, they feed you gruel and scream at you to keep the forge fire hotter. Assuming you somehow convince one to take you on, you'll need more than just enthusiasm. You'll need a contract, witnesses, and a small pile of silver to hand over as a premium. This payment proves you, or your family, can afford to have you trained. But you don't have family in the city, and you definitely don't have silver. That means you're either convincing someone to take you on out of pity, or you're about to enter a very unregulated, very miserable version of apprenticeship, sometimes called serviceman, which is like apprenticeship's sad cousin who sleeps under the stairs. You try a few doors, a cooper tells you his house is full, a weaver says your hands are too calloused for thread, a candle maker just squints at you and mumbles something about fire demons. Eventually, you meet Hal, a chainmail repairman with arms like boiled hams, and a shop that smells permanently of sweat and old iron. He doesn't say much, just gestures at a pile of tangled links and gives you a pair of pliers. You set to work. The hours blur into each other. There are no breaks, no lunch, no smiles, just the dull clink of metal on metal, the hiss of the forge, and Hal's occasional grunt of approval when you don't completely mess something up. When night comes, he throws you a hunk of cheese and points to a straw mat near the coals. "Don't snore," he says. "That's your initiation. So you're in, or something close to it. Maybe not an official apprentice yet, but an extra hand he's willing to feed and not kick out. You'll take it. It beats digging through refuse or sleeping in a barrel. And if you prove yourself over the next few weeks, maybe, just maybe, you'll earn your way into something more formal, or at least be allowed to keep your mat. Here's the thing. Apprenticeships were serious social tools. They offered upward mobility, training, even potential membership in a guild one day. But they also locked you in. You lived with your master. You ate at his table. You followed his rules. If he said no dating, no theatre, no drinking, you obeyed. And if he beat you, well, legally he was allowed, so long as he didn't maim you permanently. But don't worry, Hal doesn't seem like the violent type, and he just glares a lot, and smells vaguely of mutton. Historians still debate just how much opportunity apprenticeships really provided. Some argue they were paths to real careers and stability, especially if you managed to finish your term and join the guild. Others note that many apprentices never completed their time, got kicked out, or were used for cheap labour and discarded when they became a burden. Especially those without connections, money, or a local family to defend them, which, again, is you. And then there's the question of what happens when your term is up. After 7 long years, if you make it that far, you can apply to become a journeyman. That's a whole other hurdle. Journeymen are skilled workers, but still not masters. You'd need to produce a masterpiece to prove your skill and, more importantly, pay another large fee to be accepted into the guild proper. Many never make it past journeymen. They drift from town to town offering their skills for wages, never truly belonging anywhere. But for now, that distant future is just a blurry hope at the end of a long, sharp tunnel. The quirky part? Some apprentices rebelled, not just by running away, but by joining roving bands of out-of-work youths who roam the streets causing trouble. Known as idle prentices, they were the original bad boys of the medieval urban world, stealing, gambling, shouting rude things at clergy, and occasionally starting riots when ale ran out. If Hal kicks you out, maybe that's your next gig. Hoodlum with a hammer. But for tonight, you collapse near the forge, warm despite the ash and iron shavings now embedded in your skin. Your arms are jelly, your stomach is fullish, and Hal hasn't kicked you out. You take that as a win. As the last bell of the night rings across the city, echoing off stone and smoke, you wonder how many others are just like you, sleeping under benches, learning a trade, surviving by inches. You roll over, clutching your thin blanket, the scent of burned leather lingering in your hair, and you think maybe if you play your cards right, you might just earn a place here, or at least a quieter corner in which to dream. You wake to the smell of something burning and the sound of Hal shouting at a pigeon. It's not exactly a gentle alarm clock, but it does the job. You sit up on your straw mat and stretch your sore limbs, wondering if your arms are still attached, or just ghost memories of yesterday's forge work. Your stomach growls with theatrical flair, demanding answers. Hal tosses you a stale crust and jerks a thumb toward the alley. Time for breakfast. Hey gosh, he grumbles. You're not sure if he means to eat or to work, but either way you take the crust and go. Today you're on your own for food. Hal doesn't pay, not yet, and the cheese he gave you yesterday seems to have migrated somewhere in the night. So you do what any respectable medieval Londoner would. You follow the smells. It's barely dawn, but the street's already an outdoor kitchen. Smoke curls from grates and ovens. Vendors yell half-formed phrases like "hotties" and "no bones, acteur," as they sling mystery food at groggy workers. You have no money, but you have a nose, and right now it's leading you straight to the street food stalls. Your first encounter is with a pie seller, a woman in a shapeless wool dress and soot-smeared apron. She's hawking something that might be meat or might be yesterday's goose repackaged in a pastry. "Penny pie," she calls. "Still warm, not rat. Promise." You don't have a penny, so you help her load her little cart over a muddy gutter in exchange for a broken pie that squelches when you bite into it. It tastes vaguely of onion, vaguely of pepper, and entirely of guilt. But it's food, and that's more than a lot of people get. Street food is the backbone of the working class diet in London. No one has time or fuel to cook proper meals 3 times a day, not unless you're rich or married to a suspiciously skilled cook. For the rest, the city provides pies, eels, roasted chestnuts, ale-soaked bread, and slabs of questionable meat pulled from a smoky brazier and slapped on wooden boards. It's fast, it's hot, and it'll definitely give you some sort of gastrointestinal surprise by nightfall. You stop by a fish stand where a man is boiling eels in a pot that looks older than London itself. He's got no teeth and 3 fingers, but he offers you a deal. Help him clean the guts from yesterday's catch and you get a bowl of his famous eel jelly. You don't ask what makes it famous. You take the deal. The smell alone nearly knocks you over, but you gag your way through the job and slurp the jelly down. It's cold, greasy, and alarmingly crunchy in places that shouldn't be crunchy. But it sticks to your ribs and buys you another hour of strength. Eels, by the way, are everywhere. London's citizens are a bambun, fat, wriggling, river-dwelling protein sticks. Cheap, plentiful, and easy to cook if you can stomach them. Eels in pies, eels in stew, eels straight up boiled and slurped from a bowl like wet shoelaces. Even the wealthy eat them, though theirs come dressed in spices and dignity. For the poor, it's just dinner, or lunch, or all three. Food safety, on the other hand, is a cruel joke. You notice meat crawling with flies, cheese growing what might be medicinal mould, and bread with chalk dust mixed in to make it heavier. Londoners have no real concept of bacteria, but they've developed impressive workarounds. Burn the meat, stew it for hours, pickle everything, and always drink ale instead of water. Water is for dying. Ale might keep you alive. That's because the city's water sources are a sewer's dream. The Thames looks like it's staging a rebellion. People dump waste into it, animals wade in it, and children occasionally try to catch something in it that you sincerely hope isn't fish. Somehow, when someone hands you a cup of ale, even the weak, watered-down kind, you take it with shaky gratitude. At least the brewing process kills most of the horror within. Now here's a fringe fact for you. Medieval London had food inspectors. Sort of. City officials known as ale tasters and bread weighers roamed the markets checking for fraud. If your pie was too light or your ale too weak, they could fine you, beat you, or shut you down. The idea was public protection, but in practice it was more like controlled chaos. Bribes were frequent, enforcement selective. If you knew the right people, or shared your eel pie with the right people, you could get away with a lot. You see this play out firsthand when a butcher down the lane gets caught selling mutton that might have once been something else. A constable flips over his stall, waves a staff, and yells dramatically while everyone else keeps shopping like this happens every Tuesday, which it probably does. A few coins change hands, and suddenly the constable's got a leg of lamb slung over his shoulder and the butcher's back to slicing ribs. Historians argue over just how common food-related sickness was in medieval cities. Some say it was constant, a slow-motion plague of gut rot and misery. Others think people developed steel stomachs over time, building immunity to the worst of it. Still, you can't help but notice how many people have bad teeth, sunken eyes, or that particular shade of greenish skin that suggests they've eaten something deeply regrettable. You, however, are surviving. You trade a bit of your morning labour for food all the way through noon. Some oats here, a bruised apple there, a bit of soup that might have once seen a chicken. You learn fast. Don't ask too many questions, chew carefully, and always sniff the bread. Always. By the time the noon bell rings out across the market square, your belly is full enough to keep you moving. You wipe eel jelly from your fingers with a rag that used to be a glove, and watch as two vendors get into a heated argument over a sausage cart. One of them waves a stick, the other waves a ladle, and you quietly edge away before someone hurls mustard at your face. You head back toward Hal's, passing more stalls and faces, and realise that you're not invisible anymore. A few nods, a few grunts of recognition. One vendor even calls you Eel Boy. It's not glamorous, but it's something. And in this city, this loud, messy, hungry place, being something is the first real step toward being someone. You spend the afternoon trying to ignore the sensation of eel jelly congealing in your gut as Hal hands you a bundle of leather straps and grunts something about soaking the edge with urine. You pause. Surely you misheard. But no, he's pointing to a wooden tub in the back of the workshop with a smell so sharp it makes your eyes sting before you even reach it. Welcome to the dazzling world of medieval trades, where success often means doing jobs that would horrify even the most committed reality show contestant. If you thought being an apprentice was about slow, noble mastery of a craft, think again. Half the labour involved in any trade, especially the unglamorous ones, is dirty, brutal, and smells like a bad decision. And nowhere is that more true than with tanning. Hal's cousin, as it turns out, is a tanner. You meet him by accident when you deliver a parcel of chainmail to Southwark and get roped into hauling a pile of raw hides across the yard. That's when you learn what true existential stink is. Tanning animal hides into usable leather is a science of suffering. First, they soak the skins in water to loosen hair and flesh, then they scrape them with blunt knives to remove any remnants of what used to be a living thing. After that, the real magic happens. They bathe them in a mix of lime, dog feces, and yes, human urine. And then they soak some more. You do not ask questions, you just try to breathe through your mouth. You spend the afternoon covered in hair and goo, elbow deep in a process so foul it should be classified as medieval punishment. Your hands feel raw from scraping, and your eyes water from the fumes. And yet tanners are in demand. Leather is essential. Shoes, belts, bags, saddles, armour. Someone's got to make it. You wonder who the first person was who discovered this method. Probably someone with no sense of smell and a strong stomach. The worst part. Tanners almost always lived on the edge of the city, literally. Their work was so vile, so utterly noxious, that they were banished to the outskirts where the wind could carry the smell somewhere else. Southwark, Rotherhithe and other border neighbourhoods became dumping grounds for the trades too disgusting to be allowed near polite society. If you lived near a tannery, chances are you didn't have many visitors, not unless they were already losing their sense of smell. But tanners aren't the only ones stuck with the worst jobs. You hear whispers about gong farmers, and at first you think it sounds musical. It is not. Gong farmers clean out cesspits, literally. They climb down into sewage holes, scoop out human waste by the bucketful and cart it off to dump outside the city. At night, of course, no one wants to see that kind of horror by daylight. They get paid decently, oddly enough, because absolutely no one else wants to do it. Still, you figure even eel jelly is better than being elbow deep in yesterday's beer and someone else's breakfast. Then there's the fullers. You meet one when a white-faced man wanders into Hal's shop looking for scraps of cloth to wrap a broken toe. He reeks of ammonia. Turns out fullers work with cloth, cleaning and thickening wool using, you guessed it, more urine. They stomp on wet wool in vats for hours, their skin raw and teeth yellow, turning raw fabric into smooth, tight cloth. You watch one pass by with feet permanently stained and wonder if their dreams smell like a latrine. It's strange, though. These awful jobs keep the city running. They're invisible and essential. Without tanners, no one wears boots. Without gong farmers, the streets become even more nightmarish. Without fullers, wool is just itchy nonsense. It gives you a weird sort of respect for them. A warped, nasal-burning respect, but respect nonetheless. Still, you're lucky. Your job may involve hauling metal and burning your fingertips on hot rivets, but at least you don't have to touch anything that once sat in a chamber pot. Hal might grunt a lot, but his shop smells like charcoal and sweat, not open sewage. Perspective, you think. That's the real currency in London. Just enough perspective to realise someone has it worse. Now, scholars still argue whether these professions were viewed as dishonourable or simply unpleasant. Some guilds refuse to associate with unclean trades. Others welcome them, recognising that someone had to do the hard work. What's agreed upon is that many of these workers were excluded from city councils, church fairs or fancy weddings. Smelling like poo tended to limit your social mobility. Here's the fringe fact of the day. In 14th century London, urine was actually a traded commodity. People collected it in pots, sometimes left outside with signs asking for donations, and sold it to tanners and fullers. It was called lant, and some households earned a bit of extra coin just by relieving themselves in the right place. You now live in a world where pee is valuable. Let that sink in. As the sun dips below the rooftops and the streets begin their slow slide into evening chaos, you drag your aching body back to Hal's forge, shirt stiff with dried sweat and something less pleasant. He doesn't ask where you've been, just hands you a chunk of bread and ladle of something pretending to be stew. You eat in silence, grateful not to be scraping hides or stepping through filth tonight. You think about those tanners and gong farmers, how they do their work in the shadows, literally cast to the city's edges. No glory, no titles, no sweet-smelling roses waiting at home. Just the grind, just enough coin to survive another day. And you realise this city isn't built on stone or faith. It's built on bad smells and people who do the jobs no one else wants. It's not pretty, but it works. You curl up beside the forge, smoke stinging your nose, and wonder what fresh horror tomorrow will bring. Hopefully not more lant. Anything but lant. You're scrubbing soot from your face with a handful of ash because that's somehow supposed to make you cleaner. When Hal finally says something that isn't a grunt or a bark. "You'll need a badge," he mutters, not even looking up from the coil of mail he's hammering into the shape. "No one will take you serious without it." You pause mid-scrub, flakes of grime falling into your lap. A badge? For what fashion? "Guild," he says, now as if you're particularly slow. "Can't call yourself nothing without a guild behind you. Might as well be a rat with a hammer." He has a way with words, doesn't he? And that's when you realise the badge he means isn't jewellery or flair. It's your literal ticket to being a real craftsman. A small, often simple token, metal, stitched fabric, even wood, bearing your guild symbol. Without it, you're a nobody. With it, you're protected, recognised, and here's the key part, employable. The badge isn't just proof that you know what you're doing, it's a key to a closed club. And those clubs, they run this city. Guilds are everywhere. Bakers, carpenters, fishmongers, goldsmiths, chandlers, cobblers, each with their own rules, own masters, and own defences. They function like a medieval mashup of labour union, social network, and secret society. Join one, and you're part of a tightly woven fabric of training, contracts, market privileges, and the occasional feast. Get caught practising a trade without being in one, though, and the consequences can range from a fine to a public shaming, or worse, a citywide ban on your work. It's all very official and very exclusive. If you're born into a family with guild ties, you're halfway there before you've learned to walk. If not, like you had better find a master willing to vouch for you and spend years proving yourself. Even then, getting a badge isn't guaranteed. You'll have to pass inspections, possibly present a sample of your work, and always without fail pay a fee. And if you don't have money or connections, good luck. You decide to learn more, so you start hanging around the guild hall, not inside war of course. You'd be chased out before you could even admire the stained glass, but just outside by the steps where apprentices gather during their breaks. They talk fast, joke loudly, and look at you like you're either pitiful or a threat. Eventually one softens. A boy named Owen, apprentice to a cooper. He has quick hands, even quicker eyes, and a face that says he's seen a few things no boy should have seen. He explains it all to you. The guilds protect prices, punish bad work, and ensure that no outsider undercuts the members. They control the local economy with an iron grip. If someone dares open a shop without their blessing, guild officers can shut them down, or worse, report them to the mayor. This isn't just about tradition, it's survival. Markets are crowded, jobs are scarce, loyalty is everything. You ask if there's a guild for chainmail repair. Owen raises a brow. Maybe not exactly, but there's one for smiths, armourers' guild. You nod slowly, pretending you already knew that. Of course, obvious. The armourers' yes, guild. He warns you though, those guys don't just want skill. They want pedigree. Apprentices often come from families with long ties, and nepotism is more of a rule than a flaw. Still, he tells you where they meet. Don't try to talk to them, he says. Just listen, learn what they expect. So you do. For the next week, after each long day with Hal, you think off to St. Mary Axe, where the smiths gather in a tavern after work to drink, brag, and argue about iron quality. You sit in the corner, as invisible as you can be, slowly absorbing their language. Terms like quenched and blistered barm and cold short. You realise quickly that it's not just how well you hammer, it's how well you talk about it. Craftsmanship here is as much about posture and speech as it is about output. One night you see a man pulled up in front of the whole guild group for inspection. His apprentice had filed a rivet incorrectly, and now his entire batch is suspect. The guild officers examine his work, find 2 flawed pieces, and declare him in violation of standard. He's fined heavily, and the apprentice, red-faced and shaking, is told to redo everything by week's end. You quietly vow to triple-check your own work tomorrow. Here's something weird. Some guilds had their own secret prayers or patron saints. The bakers had St. Honoré, shoemakers had St. Crispin, the goldsmiths, they had their own chapel inside the city. Guilds weren't just work organisations, they were religious, political, and sometimes even military forces. Some funded schools, others helped members get elected to city positions, a few even ran their own miniature courts. Hal, of course, couldn't care less about all that. He's never been the part of a guild. Says he's too old for their nonsense, but you suspect it's more personal. Maybe he tried once and got shut out. Maybe he doesn't want to be measured by men who drink more than they forge. But you don't have the luxury of pride. If a guild is the way in, then you'll find a way in. Scholars still argue about how fair guilds really were. Some say they were great equalisers, helping skilled workers climb the ladder regardless of background. Others say they were little monopolies, run by the same families generation after generation, shutting out anyone without a foot in the door. And for women, forget it. With a few rare exceptions, like alewives or silk spinners, most guilds excluded them entirely, no matter how skilled. Still, every time you handle a piece of metal now, you think about that badge. That little symbol of legitimacy. It doesn't have to be fancy. Just something to say I belong, and something to get you past the sneers and doubts and into the warmth of real, paying work. One night, after Hal's fallen asleep, you stay up by the coals and carefully etch a small symbol onto the back of your dagger. A pretend mark, one you made up. It's nothing, but for now it's your badge. It might be fake, it might be foolish, but it's yours, and tomorrow you'll keep working, keep learning, and keep watching for your chance to earn the real thing. It takes you a while to notice, but eventually you realise there are more women working in this city than you'd expected. Sure, they aren't swinging hammers in forges or standing on soapboxes at Guildhall, but they're there in doorways behind baskets, beside vats inside kitchens, and they're working constantly. Alewives, laundresses, spinners, midwives, peddlers, scribes. If you start paying attention, you'll see it. The quiet economic engine of London is female, and no one's handing them badges or feast day recognition for it. You first meet Alice near the Shambles, the meat market that smells like sweat and guts even before sunrise. She's in a faded apron, sleeves rolled up past her elbows, skin as tough as saddle leather. She's boiling bones for stock, tossing scraps to a dog with one eye, and arguing with a butcher twice her size. When he throws his hands up and stomps off, she shrugs and ladles broth into chipped bowls for a line of tired-looking women. No shouting, no ceremony, just work, the way it usually is. You strike up a clumsy conversation, mostly just a hello and an offer to help carry her barrels. She sizes you up like she's trying to decide whether you're useful or likely to steal her ladle. Eventually she gives you a nod. You've got elbows, she says. Good. Keep 'em up. Don't let the market push you flat. Advice that'll stay with you longer than any blessing from a priest. Alice is what they call an alewife. She brews beer from a cramped back room and sells it at the market in wooden mugs that haven't been properly cleaned in a month. But her ale's good. Rich, nutty, thick enough to chew. And in a world where water is a gamble, her little operation keeps a dozen bellies warm and healthy. She tells you, off-handedly, that she inherited the business from her mother, who inherited it from hers. No guild, no badge, just recipes and hustle. Alewives aren't rare. In fact, brewing is one of the few trades in London where women dominate. It's domestic enough to seem proper, but profitable enough that men have started grumbling about it. You hear whispers, how the guilds want to regulate female brewers, how the church frowns on women selling strong drink. But Alice doesn't care. Let them frown, she says. Frowning don't stop thirst. Then there's Marjorie, a silk worker. You meet her when a packet of chainmail Hal sends you to deliver tears open mid-run, and you're forced to ask for a needle and thread. She loans you both, reluctantly, and in the process, you notice her hands, covered in little pinpricks and calluses, elegant but strong. She works from a rented stall by a draper's house, hand-knotting silk threads into ribbons, tassels, and little embroidered patches that sell for more than you earn in 3 days. Marjorie's trade is precise, delicate, and exhausting. Her work requires steady light, and since natural daylight's unreliable in this smoke-filled city, she burns tallow candles by the hour. She spends more on wax than on food, she tells you, but she shrugs like that's normal. Pretty things cost, she says, pulling another fine thread through the tiniest loop you've ever seen. They don't care who made it, long as it gleams. Women like her live on the edge of the trade world, present but peripheral. They don't get guild protection unless they inherit a license from a deceased husband or grease the right palms. They're paid less, expected to vanish quietly when men enter the same field, and rarely hold property or legal rights unless they're widowed. Which is why some women you meet seem oddly at peace when talking about their late husbands. Grief and freedom tied together in a way that's both unsettling and oddly understandable. Even midwifery, a profession soaked in practical skill and terrifying responsibility, is treated with half-hearted recognition. Midwives are essential, everyone knows that. They keep birthing mothers alive, guide babies into the world, and often act as informal nurses long after the fact. And yet, many are accused of witchcraft if something goes wrong. If the baby dies, it's the devil's work, one tells you bitterly. If it lives, no one remembers your name. She says this while crushing herbs with a stone pestle, her fingers stained green and purple. You don't ask what they're for. Quirk of the times. A surprising number of women in London run small businesses out of their homes, selling candles, spinning thread, baking, or mending clothes. It's informal, unpaid in legal eyes, and almost entirely hidden from record books. But without these cottage industries, half the city would be naked, starving and shivering. And most of these women never call themselves anything as grand as merchant. They were just surviving. Like you, there's still debate among scholars about how much economic power women truly had in medieval cities. Some argue that female labour was significant and deeply undervalued. Others say the rare success stories, like women who ran taverns or shops, were exceptions, not rules. What's clear, though, is that they were always working. Always. Whether it was spinning wool while nursing a child or selling apples from a basket tied around their neck. The line between labour and life barely existed. You notice it more and more now. A girl stirring dye in a cauldron behind her mother's stall. A grandmother rolling out barley cakes while her daughter haggles over prices. A washerwoman folding shirts beside a steaming pot, humming a song that might be older than the city itself. The work never stops. It just shifts from one pair of hands to another. By evening you return to Hal's shop, the forge still glowing faintly. He asks where you've been, but not like he cares, more like he's making sure you weren't arrested. You just say learning. He snorts but doesn't press further. As you settle in on your usual straw mat, stomach just full enough to stop grumbling, you think about Alice ladling broth with her sleeves rolled up, Marjorie sewing until her fingers bled, the midwife counting herbs in the fading light. No badges, no banners, just grit. And in a city where every penny matters and every hour is rented from tomorrow, you start to think they might be the toughest workers of all. There's a certain way the air feels around churches in medieval London. Still, hushed, heavy with incense and half-formed prayers. You pass one every morning on your way back from errands, St Mary-le-Bow, with its tilted spire and blackened stones, and each time you slow just a little. Not because you're pious, necessarily, but because inside those doors, people whisper promises, light candles, and sometimes, if they're clever enough, make a decent living. You're starting to learn that in this city, salvation and commerce go hand in hand. The church is everywhere. Its spires poke through the smog like fingers scratching at heaven, its bells dictate your day, and its representatives, priests, monks, friars, seem to side through every alley and market like shadows in robes. At first glance, it's all chants and candles, stained glass and Latin. But stick around long enough, and you'll notice that beneath the robes lies a fully operational economy. And not just a holy one. You first realise this when a friar nearly bowls you over in the street, robes flapping, pouch jingling like a purse full of sin. He's not running from anything, just in a hurry. Apparently there's a hot lead on a relic across town and he's hoping to get there before the other friars sniff it out. A relic, he tells you when he stops to catch his breath, is the best way to bring in the coin. Something about holy knuckle bones or tears of a saint or, in one case, a chicken feather that might have brushed against the Virgin Mary's slipper. Relics are big business. The faithful will travel for days to kneel in front of a saint's shinbone or a splinter from the true cross. And where there are pilgrims, there are offerings, candles, coin, donations. The churchmen who possess relics, or convince people they do, can bring in a tidy income. Some churches have full-time staff just for organising queues and collecting coins. You begin to see the appeal. Selling salvation is apparently quite profitable. You meet Brother Aelfric near the outskirts of town, where a small chapel claims to have a vial of St Cuthbert's spit. He's friendly, calm, and eerily good at getting people to hand over pennies. Every drop helps the soul, he says, lifting the tiny glass tube with reverence. You ask gently if it's really St Cuthbert's. He smiles without blinking. It is if you believe it is, which is possibly the most medieval thing anyone has ever said to you. Of course, not everyone in the church is selling snake oil. Some are genuinely trying to help. You volunteer briefly at a nearby priory to earn a bed for a night and end up spending hours peeling garlic and boiling herbs for the poorhouse infirmary. A nun with a voice like gravel walks you through the basics of wound poultices and shows you how to make salve from pig fat and moss. It's effective, if not exactly pleasant. And you realise then, under the flicker of candlelight and the choking smell of boiled herbs, that the church isn't just the city's spiritual spine, it's also its safety net. Poor, go to the monastery, sick, pray for a bed in the infirmary, starving, find the friars on bread day. The church provides just enough to keep the soul and body loosely stitched together. But here's the twist. It's not free. Not always. Sometimes it's coin, sometimes labour, sometimes just attendance. But there's always a cost, even if it's hidden in obligation. Tithes, those 1/10 taxes paid to the church, are expected from everyone who earns, no matter how little. And evading them, bad idea. The church has long arms, soft voices, and a very sharp memory. And then there's the indulgence racket. You hear about it one night at the ale stall, when a man with suspiciously clean fingernails boasts that he's 3 years off purgatory, thanks to a parchment he bought from a friar outside St. Paul's. Indulgences are basically get-out-of-suffering-later cards, sold to reduce the time your soul will spend in spiritual waiting rooms. Pray, pay, and shave off a few years. The rich buy them like trading cards. The poor squint at them and sigh. The debate about indulgences still gets historians hot under the collar. Some say it was just a practical way to fund church projects and keep the lights on. Others call it spiritual extortion. Either way, in medieval London, it's another cog in the giant wheel of work for survival. Because while you're labouring for your daily bread, someone else is selling invisible promises for real silver. But perhaps the oddest way to make a living through the church: faking visions. It happens more than you'd think. A girl in your neighbourhood, not more than 14, begins having dreams about saints visiting her. She's poor, hungry, barely clothed, and suddenly she's got visitors. Nobles bring her food. Priests write down her words. She's invited to dinner by a bishop. You see the sly glint in her eyes and wonder if maybe she's cleverer than all of us. These fringe prophets don't always last. Some are caught and punished. Some fade when the novelty wears off. But others manage to turn their spiritual claims into long-term comfort. As long as they stay just vague enough to be holy and just dramatic enough to be interesting, they can carve out a niche between heresy and fame. Of course, you're not about to start claiming visions. You've got enough trouble keeping your fingers unburned in Hal's Forge, but you tuck away the knowledge, just in case. Knowing who has the power to feed, house, or punish you is never wasted information in this town. Historians still puzzle over the church's dual role: guardian of souls and land-grabbing landlord, humble servant and economic juggernaut. What's clear to you, standing outside the shadow of a crumbling abbey wall, is that faith here isn't just about belief. It's about transaction. You give your time, your work, your coin. The church gives comfort, or absolution, or maybe just a place to sleep when it rains. As the bells toll vespers and the sky turns the colour of soot, you pass a group of monks gathering for evening prayer. Their voices rise in low chant, echoing off the stone like something ancient and half-remembered. For a moment the city holds its breath. You keep walking, the sound fading behind you. You've got no relics, no robes, no tithe to spare. But you've got strong hands, a borrowed coat, and the fading taste of broth on your tongue. And tonight, in a city where even grace has a price tag, that might just be enough. You finally get paid. Not much. Just a few worn coins and half a loaf of bread, but they clink in your palm with a satisfying little weight that feels like possibility. You stare at them longer than you should, turning them over, inspecting the crude, uneven stamps like they're tiny miracles. They're not silver, not even close, but they're yours, and they're gone almost immediately. That's the thing no one tells you about making money in medieval London. It doesn't stay yours for long. Before you can even think about tucking a coin under your mat for safekeeping, the city steps in, hands outstretched. Taxes, tithes, bribes, fees. Your first real earnings are less a triumph and more of an open invitation for everyone with a fancy hat and a seal-stamped parchment to come pick your pockets. It starts with the market toll. You don't even know you're being taxed until a guard with an oiled beard and a permanent scowl stops you just outside Hal's Street. He gestures at your coin pouch and says you owe a toll for using the road. You blink. Road you walk on? That road? Apparently yes. And unless you want trouble, and you really don't, you fork over a penny. That's a third of your day gone before you even buy breakfast. Then comes the tithe. The church doesn't wait for your convenience. A robed clerk arrives at Hal's door with a list and a box, and starts reciting in a nasal tone how much you, as a working soul, owe for the preservation of your eternal salvation and the support of God's ministers. Hal grunts and throws in 2 coins. You're not technically on the books yet, so you're ignored this time. But the implication is clear. If you earn, they'll find you. Later, you're approached by a man calling himself a watch officer, who explains, very calmly, very firmly, that a small contribution helps keep the night patrol funded. A well-lit alley is a safe alley, he says with the smile of someone who's never spent a night in one. Hal flips him a halfpenny and mutters something about buying his own damn torch. You do the same. It's either that or risk having the watchman forget your street exists when things get ugly. You learn quickly that everything is monetized. If you want to bring goods into the city to sell, gate fee. If you want to sharpen blades near the market, stall fee. If you want to collect firewood from the nearby fields, forage fee. And God help you if you're caught without a license. You watch a woman get dragged into the stocks for selling apples without permission, her produce confiscated, her stall knocked down, her dignity scattered like bruised fruit. The authorities say it's about order. You start to suspect it's mostly about coin. What stings more than the taxes, though, are the bribes. They're not called bribes, of course. They're called favours, tokens, goodwill gestures. If you want a better spot in the market queue, you slip the inspector something. If you want to avoid inspection at all, you slip a little more. Even Hal does it, muttering curses under his breath as he hands a copper to a visiting guild officer who just happens to be checking forge compliance this week. Everyone plays the game, even the people who say they hate it. Here's the kicker. Some of these collectors aren't even real. You spot the same man shaking down 3 different stalls for 3 different official city purposes, all with a different title and a fancier feather in his cap each time. When you ask Owen about it, he just laughs. If you wear a belt with enough leather and yell loud enough, someone will believe you're in charge, until someone bigger tells you to shut up. There's a fringe story circulating about a boy who dressed up in a discarded city cloak, started collecting chimney taxes, and managed to swindle half a neighbourhood before being caught. He was publicly whipped, of course, but even the constable admitted, grudgingly, that it was clever. Scholars still debate whether medieval London's taxes were truly oppressive or just scattered and inconsistent. Some argue the structure was flexible enough to adjust to individual means, that collectors had leeway to forgive or delay payments. Others say the patchwork system was a nightmare, overlapping fees, conflicting jurisdictions, and too many people demanding coin from too few pockets. You don't know about the scholars, you just know that by midday your purse is a lot lighter and you've barely bought anything. You try to keep some money back. You really do, but it seems every time you even think about saving, something unexpected happens. A shoe breaks and you have to pay the cobbler. The weather turns and you need to buy a second-hand cloak. A boy runs by and snatches a coin from your palm like a bird of prey, disappearing into the alleys before you can shout. You chase him for a block and a half before realising 2 other children are rifling through your bag. You manage to keep your bread, barely. It's a hard lesson. In London, earning is only half the battle. Keeping what you earn, that's the real trick. There's always someone waiting with a hand outstretched, legal or not. And the city's authorities, when they do help, rarely come free of charge. You learn to hide coins in your boot, to wrap them in cloth and tuck them deep inside your tunic. You stop jingling when you walk. You start counting prices before you open your mouth. At the end of the day, you sit with Hal beside the forge, chewing on roasted barley and picking bits of grit out of your teeth. You hand him your earnings, and he divides it with surprising fairness, though not without a lecture. You want to live here, he says, you pay your way. City bleeds you dry, but it don't bleed you dead. If you're clever. You nod. He's right, in a gruff, soot-covered way. London takes. But it also teaches. As you lay down that night, you clench your hand tight around the single coin you managed to hide. Just one. Not much, but it's something. It's survival, hope, and maybe, if you're careful, tomorrow's breakfast. And in this city, that's no small victory. You wake to the sharp jab of Hal's boot nudging your ribs, and the delightful realisation that today's your turn to help haul his wares to market. There's no time to stretch or yawn dramatically. You've got a basket of chainmail to carry and a cart to push through streets already jammed with livestock, merchants, and people who clearly woke up meaner than usual. Welcome to London's marketplace, where chaos is currency and the geese have sharper elbows than you do. Market days are the heartbeat of medieval London. They don't come once a week. They come whenever the city breathes in enough people to make selling worth the effort. Cheapside is your main destination today, a dense corridor of shouting voices, stamping hooves and stalls spilling over with everything from iron tools to questionable fish. The name Cheapside comes from chepe, an old word for market. And here, cheap doesn't mean low price. It means business. It means volume. It means if you're not loud, you're invisible. You set up Hal's goods at the edge of the ironworkers' row, trying to make chainmail look enticing, like it's the kind of thing someone buys impulsively with their morning oatcake. Hal slaps your hands away from arranging it too neatly. They don't care how it looks, growls. They want to know it won't fall apart the first time someone pokes them. So you bang on it a little, make a show of the rings holding tight, A man in leather armour stops, snorts and moves on. Hal seems pleased. Apparently rejection means you're in the game. Everywhere you turn there's shouting. Eels, fresh eels, still wriggling. Hot pies, 2 for a penny, no sawdust, promise. Wool, wool softer than a bishop's bottom. It's not just merchants, it's performers too. A man on stilts juggles knives while spouting lewd jokes. A boy with a puppet show attracts a crowd of laughing children. Music from a reed pipe weaves its way between the stalls like a lazy fly. Even the local pickpockets put on a performance, slipping through the crowd with dramatic innocence. The smells hit you like a freight cart. Cinnamon and rot, grilled meat and open sewage, fresh flowers and overripe cheese. It's a mix that clings to your clothes and lives in your nose long after you've left. Your stomach turns at least twice before settling into a cautious truce. You munch on a barley cake and try not to breathe too deeply near the fish stalls. Markets aren't just for selling though, they're for news. You overhear a butcher talking about a fire near Fleet Street. A vendor swears the king's cousin was spotted in disguise buying spiced apples. Someone else mutters about the price of wool going up because of unrest in Flanders. The news may be exaggerated, garbled, or flat out wrong, but it spreads faster here than anywhere else. If something's happened, or about to happen, you'll hear it before the bell tower does. You take a break to wander while Hal haggles with the militia captain over helmet repairs. You pass stalls with fruit shaped like they've seen better centuries, meat still twitching with flies, and silk so fine it looks like water. You even spot a spice seller with little paper packets of saffron, cloves and pepper. Foreign goods like these are rare, expensive, and reserved for the rich, but you still lean in and sniff. Just for a second, you're in another world, one that smells like somewhere warm and far away. And then, of course, the fishmonger starts yelling at you for blocking his stall. London's market system is sprawling. Some are fixed, like Smithfield for meat or Billingsgate for fish. Others are pop-up clusters on corners, in churchyards, even along bridges. Each is governed by local rules, loosely enforced by city officials who make the rounds with scrolls, scales and permanent scowls. If you cheat your customers, sell unapproved goods, or use faulty weights, you can be fined, pilloried, or banned. Hal tells you a story about a baker who sold underweight loaves and was forced to parade through town with his bad bread tied around his neck. You believe him. You've seen worse punishments for less. There's a fringe law that sticks with you. Vendors in the fish markets are technically not allowed to shout about their goods. Of course, everyone ignores it. A silent fish market would be unnatural, but the rules there are leftover from some long-dead attempt at civility. London is full of rules like that, made, ignored, forgotten, and sometimes remembered just in time to ruin someone's day. The biggest surprise? How much of the market runs on trust or the performance of it? A seller's tone, their posture, the way they offer a sample without being asked. It all matters. Shady eyes, sweaty palms, or too much eagerness can sink a sale. You watch 2 merchants barter over a pile of dried figs, the conversation more about compliments and sideways insults than their actual price. One calls the other a fox in velvet. You're still not sure if it's praise or slander. You help Hal pack up near dusk, the sun a dull smear behind the chimneys. You're exhausted, bruised from bumping elbows and barrels all day, but there's a strange satisfaction in having held your own amid the storm. Hal counts the coin, mostly copper, and tosses you a small handful. "Don't spend it all on pie," he says. You nod solemnly, planning to spend exactly half of it on pie. As you push the cart homeward, past the street performers packing up and the vendors sweeping fish guts into the gutter, you realise something. The market is more than a place to buy and sell. It's where the city breathes, where it gossips, jokes, argues, survives. It's where the poor try to get lucky, and the rich try to blend in while pretending they don't see the muck. Historians still debate how accessible markets really were to the lower classes. Some argue that markets were welcoming, open places where anyone with a few coins could find something. Others say that inflation, taxes and competition pushed out smaller sellers over time, turning market stalls into another form of gatekeeping. From where you stand, both are true. The market welcomes you, but only if you can elbow hard enough and shout loud enough to earn your spot. Back at Hal's, you collapse near the fire with a belly full of meat pie and the smoky tang of success still on your skin. It's not clean work. It's not gentle, but you made it through the market without getting robbed, scammed, or run over by a cheese cart. and in London that qualifies as a banner day. By now you know better than to flinch when someone yells in the street. It could be a fight, a warning, or just a man advertising his goose pies at top volume. Either way, you keep your head down and your boots moving. Today though, you're headed somewhere different. Off the cobbles and into the grit. Hal's asked you to help a cousin on a work crew, and you're not thrilled about it. The word construction in medieval London usually means blisters, splinters and falling debris, and if you're lucky, nothing on fire. You follow directions scrawled on the back of a meat invoice, because why waste parchment, and eventually reach the construction site, or more accurately, a massive uneven pit in the ground surrounded by wooden scaffolding that looks like it was designed by drunk termites. A cathedral is going up here, or maybe just a chapel, depending on who's funding it this week. You spot stonecutters, carpenters, rope pullers, lime mixers, and one man whose job appears to be yelling and pointing at nothing. You step forward with your usual mix of confidence and confusion. The man in charge is Hal's cousin Watt, a wiry mason with sun-leathered skin and no visible patience. "You're Hal Stray," he says, eyes scanning you like a lump of unshaped granite. You nod. He tosses you a hammer. "Don't drop it on your foot, unless you're looking for an excuse not to come back." Encouragement medieval style. Your job today is hauling stones. Not even the big ones. Just smaller blocks from the edge of the site to wherever Watt grunts at you to put them. You join a loose line of workers, all shifting and stacking stones in a dance that's equal parts rhythm and grumbling. The air is full of dust and shouted instructions, wood creaks, stone grinds, and occasionally something heavy thuds to the ground and everyone winces. Here's the thing about medieval construction, it's slow. Painfully, absurdly slow. Cathedrals took decades, sometimes centuries to finish. Workers came and went, generations laboured on the same arches, and every single piece, every stone, every beam, every joint was set by hand. You think of the grand churches you've seen, their soaring ceilings and stained glass, and it's almost funny to realise they were built on the backs of people who, like you, had no idea what the final result would even look like. Watt shows you how to prepare mortar, which involves slaking lime with water in a wooden trough until it becomes a thick bubbling goo that smells like regret. You carry it in heavy buckets to the stonemasons, who trowel it with the precision of artists and the attitudes of hangry bears. They grunt approval when your bucket's full and sigh loudly when it's not. You try to stay out of their way. Lunch is a shared affair. Barley bread, hard cheese and onions passed around in grease-stained cloths. A few of the older workers swap stories, mostly about accidents, arguments, or mysterious stains on the chapel walls. One man, missing 3 fingers, claims he lost them to a vengeful pigeon. No one argues with him, but pigeons here do look suspicious. The master builder eventually arrives, flanked by 2 apprentices with ink-stained fingers and a scroll covered in angular sketches. He's wearing a leather apron, and a hat that looks just fancy enough to suggest authority. He walks the site slowly, inspecting beams, checking lines, nodding thoughtfully. Everyone straightens up when he passes, even Watt. You learn something strange during the afternoon. The builders don't just follow blueprints. They use sacred geometry, carefully calculated ratios, religious symbolism and precise measurements meant to reflect divine order. A misaligned cornerstone isn't just a mistake, it's an affront to the heavens. You overhear one apprentice whisper, "Measure twice, then pray," which seems like a solid motto for this job. Now, historians often argue about how organised medieval construction actually was. Some claim these sites were paragons of coordination and engineering genius. Others point out the wildly inconsistent records, missing tools, and the alarming number of buildings that collapse mid-build. Judging by today's experience, it's probably both. The work is skilled, no question, but held together by spit superstition and last-minute problem-solving. A fringe detail you pick up from one of the carpenters. Workers sometimes carve tiny figures into beams or under stones before placing them. Protective charms. Little men with oversized noses, animals, even strange symbols you don't recognise. "Keep the devils out," the carpenter tells you with a wink. Or at least keep them confused. You start noticing more of them, faces peeking out beneath supports, tucked into corners. The cathedral is being built by ghosts, saints and inside jokes. By late afternoon you're ready to collapse. Your hands are blistered. Your arms feel like overcooked noodles. And Watt's decided you're now strong enough to try your luck with the pulley. You spend an hour hauling buckets of rubble up from the pit using a rope and wheel that moans like it's haunted. At one point the wheel skips, the bucket swings and nearly takes out a passing priest. You apologise. He blesses you out of sheer reflex. You both move on. As the sun droops behind the rooftops and the bells call for evening prayers, the work crew begins to pack up. Tools are stacked, buckets emptied, hands wiped on aprons so filthy they practically walk away on their own. What slaps your shoulder hard and says, "You didn't die. That's better than last week's boy." A compliment, apparently. You trudge home with mortar dust in your hair, one fewer toenail than you started the day with, and the odd feeling that you were part of something big, even if you don't know what yet. Building the city isn't just about walls and arches. It's about people putting one stone on top of another and calling it hope. Hal doesn't say anything when you return, but he nods once and hands you a cup of warm ale. You sip it slowly, each gulp washing down a bit of grime and soreness. You think about the beams, the hidden carvings, the math disguised as faith. And for a moment you picture that cathedral finished, rising above the smoke, catching the morning sun. Impossible and perfect. It's not your cathedral, not really. But maybe, just maybe, your fingerprint will be in the mortar somewhere. And maybe that's enough. At first it's just a cough. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, just a soft, persistent rasp from the stall across the alley. You don't think much of it. People cough all the time in London. Between the soot, the smoke, the cold air and the mouldy bedding, it's a miracle anyone breathes clearly at all. But then someone else coughs. Then another. And then the bells start ringing. Not the usual ones. Slower. Heavier. You recognise them before anyone says the words, "Someone has died." You don't panic, yet. But there's a shift in the air, and not the usual stink of fish and dung. This one's quieter, like the city is holding its breath. And the market's different today. Fewer vendors, quicker transactions. One woman, usually loud and cheery, doesn't even try to shout about her turnip pies. People avoid eye contact. They move through the streets like they're trying not to wake something. And then you hear it. The pestilence. It rolls off someone's tongue like a curse. The word you hoped you'd never hear in your lifetime. A word that's not so much spoken as felt, like a cold hand slipping under your collar. The plague. It's not a legend anymore. It's here, in your street. At first, it's just whispers and sudden absences. A neighbour's door stays shut for days. A vendor stops showing up to their stall. A baker quietly boards up his windows. You ask Hal about it, trying to sound casual. He spits into the forge and mutters, "Don't touch no one. Don't trust no one. Don't wait around." You don't know what it is exactly, how it spreads, why it kills some and spares others. No one does, but the symptoms are clear. Fever, swelling, vomiting. The boils, when they come, are the worst. Angry black lumps under the skin, usually near the neck or groin, as if your body is trying to push the disease out of you and failing miserably. You see your first corpse 2 days later. Not your first corpse ever. This is London after all. But your first plague corpse. It's a boy, maybe 13, carried out on a board by 2 men wearing scarves over their faces. They don't even knock. They just take the body and move on. No prayers, no bells, no mother crying in the doorway. Just silence and shuffling footsteps. You don't know if he had a name. He probably did. But the city's too full now for names. Soon the carts start appearing, wooden wagons pulled slowly through the streets, piled with bodies. Some wrapped in linen, some just left. The cry goes out in the early morning. Bring out your dead. You flinch the first time. By the 5th you're numb. The carts clatter past like horrible parades, leaving behind the thick, sour stink of decay. You breathe through your sleeve and keep walking. You have to. Everyone does. Quarantine becomes the new game. Red crosses are painted on doors. Some families lock themselves in inn, hoping the pestilence will pass them by like a storm. Others flee the city. If they have money, horses, or a place to go. You don't. So you stay. You do what you can, you avoid crowds. You wash your hands, sort of. You avoid meat that looks too red, bread that's too soft. You pray or pretend to. The city's economy doesn't stop completely, though. Not at first. People still need food, firewood and beer. But the tone changes. Everything is quieter, colder. Transactions are quick, no one lingers, no one touches. You learn to exchange coins by tossing them onto cloth and stepping back. Some vendors won't serve anyone without gloves. One man starts selling plague charms, bits of cloth soaked in vinegar, herbs stuffed in pouches, even dried frogs. Guaranteed to keep death away, he claims, holding up a bundle of lavender and mint. You nearly laugh until you realise people are actually buying them. You pass a church one evening and see a funeral mass being said for no one in particular. Just a general prayer. The priest looks tired, pale. There's a rumour going around that some priests are refusing to give last rites now, too risky. Some get sickened after visiting too many plague houses. Others disappear completely. You spot a group of monks leaving the city on foot, chanting as they walk, carrying nothing but books and hope. There's a fringe belief that cats are to blame. You hear someone say it on a corner, loudly, confidently, that cats are devil's spies bringing the sickness. The next day you see a pile of dead cats in an alley, and your stomach turns. You want to believe people are better than this, but right now no one is thinking clearly. Fear turns the city into something wild, something cruel. Even Hal locks the forge for 3 days, not because he's sick, but because he's not willing to risk it. Can't hammer iron with a fever, he says flatly. Historians still debate how the plague actually moved through London. Was it the rats, the fleas, contaminated food, maybe all of it? Maybe none. No one agrees. What they do agree on is the death toll. It was staggering. 1/3 of the city gone, maybe more. The records are spotty. People stopped writing when their hands started shaking. Still, life refuses to stop completely. Even now, you see it in little moments. A child skipping stones into the Thames, a couple holding hands behind a cart, a girl singing quietly to herself as she sweeps a doorway no one will walk through. These small acts of defiance of normalcy are the only prayers some people still remember. By the 3rd week, it's clear this isn't going away, not soon. You take to sleeping with your boots on, just in case you have to leave suddenly. You keep food wrapped in 2 layers of cloth, you avoid anyone coughing, you stop touching your face, and at night you lie awake listening for the cartwheels. And still you get up each day. You breathe the air sharply, carefully. You wash in cold water, you eat what you can, you nod to Hal, you keep working, because there's nothing else to do. Because this is London, and if the city's not dead yet, neither are you. You can't control who gets sick. You can't predict which houses will go dark, but you can carry one more bucket. You can swing the hammer, you can hold your breath and hope that tomorrow smells a little less like fear. And somehow that's enough to keep going. The cough lingers, even though your chest is clear and your skin unspotted. It's in your head, more than anything. Every time someone around you hacks or sniffles, your body tenses like it's bracing for a blow. You tell yourself it's just nerves. Just ash from the forge, or damp air from the river. But when 3 people from your alley vanish in the same week, and no one asks where they went, the fear settles deeper, like dust in the folds of your coat. You learn to live with it. You have to. And yet somehow, the city does what it always does. It keeps turning. The carts of the dead roll by a little less often. The market starts to fill again. You hear laughter, actual carefree laughter, from the tavern 3 doors down. The plague isn't gone, but it's receding, like a tide that swept through and took too many with it, then wandered off in search of easier prey. There's no celebration, just a long collective exhale that smells like survival and regret. But with that breath comes another familiar scent, opportunity, and not the clean, honest kind either. Because in London, when death takes a break, crime steps in to stretch its legs. It starts with little things. A missing coin purse, a loaf snatched from a vendor's cart, a cartwright beaten and left in the gutter with his shoes missing. People are desperate, those who lost family, jobs, or both. The dead didn't take their debts with them, the city's still hungry. If you're lucky, you still have your hands. If you're not, you might have to use them for something less than legal. You're walking down Fish Street one morning when a boy, no older than 10, slams into you and vanishes into the crowd. A moment later, you realise your pouch is lighter. You curse under your breath and spin around, catching sight of a small figure weaving between barrels and baskets like he's been doing it since he learned to walk. You chase him for 3 alleys before realising it's hopeless. He's faster, smarter, hungrier. That night you mention it to Owen, the cooper's apprentice. He laughs a little too hard. He's called Rat. That's what the street boys call him. Probably lifted a dozen purses that day alone. He shrugs. Not bad for someone who sleeps in a chimney flue. It's then you realise there's a whole economy in this city that never shows up in the market records or the guild ledgers. It's alive in the corners, under stairs, behind taverns, inside shadows. The crime economy. Petty theft, pickpocketing, smuggling, forging, gambling, and some people are very good at it. You try not to get involved. Really you do, But when a man in a fur-trimmed cloak offers you double your usual rate to ferry a package across the river without asking questions, you hesitate. Not long, but enough. The man sees the hesitation and slides another coin across the table. You pocket both and tell yourself it's just a delivery job. Nothing more. The package is wrapped in oilcloth and smells faintly of ink and old paper. You don't peek, but your fingers twitch the whole way across the Thames. The ferryman you hire doesn't ask questions either. Just takes his cut and nods at the drop point. A side alley near an apothecary that's never open but always smells like burnt rosemary. You leave the bundle, walk away, and pretend you didn't hear the knock from inside the wall. After that it gets easier. A package here, a message there. A whispered phrase passed from one man to another in the market. You're not a criminal, you tell yourself. You're just flexible. And in London, flexible people eat. You hear about a group operating near the Sewage edge. Cut purses and counterfeiters calling themselves the Twisters. Apparently they have a code and everything. You're not brave enough to get involved directly, but Owen swears he saw a man pass a lead coin so perfect it fooled a goldsmith. When the smith bit it, yes, they still do that. His tooth snapped. The counterfeiter apparently apologised, handed him another fake coin and walked away laughing. You're not sure if the story's true, but you want it to be. You do witness one punishment firsthand. A boy caught stealing apples is brought before the local bailiff. He's maybe 12, thin, hands shaking. The stall owner wants a public flogging. The crowd is divided, some jeering, others silent. Eventually the bailiff opts for the stocks. They lock the boy's arms and neck in a wooden frame near the market square, and leave him there for hours while people throw rotten turnips and old fish heads at him. You walk past once, then again. The third time you drop a crust of bread beside him without making eye contact. He doesn't thank you. He just eats like he hasn't in days. There's a debate among historians. Were medieval cities truly dens of crime, or has time just amplified the stories? Some argue that urban law enforcement was stricter than we give credit for. City guards, tithings, and local watchmen worked together to keep order. Others believe the sheer cycle of poverty and desperation made crime not only inevitable, but sometimes the only way to survive. The truth, like everything else here, lives somewhere in the mud. A strange fact you hear from an old storyteller. In some towns, executioners were paid extra if the condemned died quickly. If not, they'd be fined for incompetence. You wonder how many executioners took their time just to earn the bonus, and how many criminals begged for a fast hand and didn't get one. You still work for Hal mostly. The forge is steady, honest, but the edges of your days are a little darker now. You know who to nod at and who to avoid. You notice when the guard changes shifts. You hear coins clink in empty alleyways and don't ask why. You're not a thief, not really, not yet, but you're beginning to understand how a person becomes one. As you curl up that night on your usual pile of rags, the city hums outside. Voices, footsteps, maybe even laughter. Somewhere in the dark, someone is breaking a lock. Somewhere else, someone is slipping away with something they didn't earn. And just maybe, someone is watching you sleep and wondering what you might steal next. But for now, your hands are clean, mostly, and in a city where survival often comes down to what you're willing to do in the dark, that's more than most can say. You're back on the river. Again. Because in London, the Thames isn't just a body of water. It's a highway, a job site, a trash bin, a public bath, and the city's favourite place to drown. But mostly it's work. Hal's forge isn't near the docks, but every so often he needs you to run an order across the river, or fetch charcoal from a barge, or, like today, help his brother ferry barrels of something heavy, wet, and suspicious smelling from Southwark to Billingsgate. You don't ask questions anymore. You just lift with your knees and try not to drop anything overboard. Hal's brother Aldwyn is a waterman, one of hundreds who make their living rowing people and goods up and down the Thames. The streets are crowded, muddy, clogged with carts and animals and shouting. The river is just as crowded, but at least you don't get run over by pigs, much. Aldwyn's boat is long and narrow, with room for passengers or cargo depending on the day, and smells like old rope and dried fish. He hands you an oar with a grimace. "Don't feather it," he says. You don't know what that means, but you nod like you do. Rowing the Thames is harder than it looks. The current pulls one way, the wind another. Your arms scream within 5 minutes, and if you think steering a boat full of barrels through a mess of other boats, floating refuse and the occasional dead animals easy, you're living in a dream world. Aldwyn, for his part, doesn't seem to notice your struggle. He's too busy barking at other watermen, swearing at dock workers, and occasionally making extremely rude gestures at passing nobles and pleasure barges. Despite the chaos, the river is the city's lifeblood. Everything moves along it. Barrels of wine, crates of wool, timber, salt, fish, coal, people. You see boats so low in the water they look ready to vanish. Others so tall and proud they practically sneer at your tiny craft. Some belong to merchants, some to private estates. A few are wherries, like Aldwin's, small passenger boats for hire, rowed by tough men who know the tides better than they know their own children. And yes, people ride the river too. If you're rich, you hire a private waterman and glide past the mess. If you're poor, you pay what you can and squeeze into a boat like the one you're on now, hoping it doesn't tip over when someone sneezes. Sometimes the watermen will race each other, just to break the monotony. Aldwin swears he once beat a knight's barge in a bet and won a gold ring. You believe half the story, maybe less. You pull into a dock near Billingsgate, unloading the barrels with shaking arms while trying not to retch. Whatever was in them, pickled herring, fish guts, or something worse, has soaked through. A dock supervisor waves a tally sheet and mumbles something about missing inventory. Aldwin curses under his breath and hands over a few coins. "Always losing stuff," he mutters. Sometimes to the tide, sometimes to the tide's cousins with long fingers. You think of the smugglers you've heard about. Boats loaded at night, goods quietly stopped upriver, then sold behind taverns before the tacksmen even wake up. There's a lot of quiet trading on the Thames. Legitimate on paper, shady in practice. You hear about it constantly. A fisherman claiming 3 nets worth of catch when he pulled 5. A brewer watering down ale barrels and shipping them out by moonlight. Even monks moving wine upriver to avoid city levies. Everyone skims a little off the top. The river makes it easy. No toll booths, no inspections. Unless you get unlucky, it's fluid, literally and figuratively. You meet a woman named Tilda at one of the smaller docks. She's one of the rare female water traders, running firewood and kindling from the marsh edges into the heart of the city. Tough as boot leather and louder than most dockhands, she swings an oar like a club and calls you duckling with a smirk that makes you feel about 5 years old. But she shows you how to tie a proper dock knot and gives you half a smoked eel for your trouble. In her words, ain't just men who know water. You ask her about the tides and she gives you a brief, furious lesson. The Thames is tidal far into the city, rising and falling twice a day. Miss your timing and you're stranded, swept or stuck in the mud like a fool. Watermen like Aldwin and Tilda live by the rhythm of the river. When to load, when to launch, when to row like mad and pray to St. Brendan you don't capsize. You start to feel the rhythm yourself slowly, the creak of the oarlocks, the sudden shift when the current changes, the strange, almost religious hush that falls when you float under London Bridge. London Bridge, by the way, is nothing like the stories say. It's not some quaint little crossing with flowers and fiddlers. It's a packed stone monstrosity lined with buildings, vendors, and people who somehow live above the river in leaning wooden structures that look like they were designed by accident. The water rushes through its narrow arches like it's trying to escape the city. You steer through carefully, and Aldwin tells you how boats have smashed against the piers before, flipped, vanished. You nod and tighten your grip. Historians still debate how efficient the river trade really was. Some claim the Thames was the beating heart of the city's economy, more organised than it looked, with records, routines, even river police. Others argue it was chaos with oars, held together by experience and bribery. What you see makes you think both might be true. There's structure, but it's the kind that could collapse in a stiff wind. A fringe detail that sticks with you. Some Thames watermen were also informants. They overheard secrets from passengers, carried letters sealed in wax, and sometimes passed messages for the crown. No one suspects the man rowing your boat is the one who knows what the bishop said to the goldsmith's wife after Vespers. Information, like fish, flows where it wants. You head back at dusk, sore, sunburnt and soaked with river spray. Aldwin actually compliments your rowing once, quietly. Then he points out your posture is still terrible. You'll take it. Back at Hal's, you eat supper with arms like wet ropes and legs that feel like you've climbed every stair in the tower. Hal chuckles at your sun-reddened face. "River'll either toughen you up or feed you to the gulls," he says. "You're still here. Must mean you're floating." You nod, too tired to argue. The city may be built on stone, but you're starting to understand it runs on water. And if you want to survive, you better learn how to paddle. Some nights, after the forge cools and the streets settle into their strange, smoky hush, You hear music. Not the hymns from churches or the distant toll of bells, but real music. Rough, rhythm-heavy, half in tune and twice as loud as it needs to be. It drifts out from behind alehouse doors and across the crooked rooftops, carried on the same air that reeks of tallow smoke and stew. You follow it once, curious, boots crunching over loose cobblestones, until you reach a courtyard behind a tavern where two fiddlers are dueling for coin and a barefoot girl is spinning so fast her skirts become a weapon. You don't stay long, not the first night, but something inside you lights up just a little. Entertainment in medieval London isn't some polite affair. It's not velvet chairs and chandeliers, not for people like you anyway. It's whatever fits in a square, a tavern, or a moment's break from work. It's loud, earthy, and usually cheap. Minstrels, jugglers, bear-baiters, puppeteers, dice rollers, actors with questionable morals and even worse costumes, all of them scraping together a living from applause, ale tips, and hope. Take the bear pit near Saville. Vark, for example. Yes, bear pit. It's exactly what it sounds like. A circular enclosure where a half-starved bear is chained to a post and set upon by dogs, while a drunken crowd screams for blood. You see it once, and once is enough. The bears. Name, someone tells you, is old Giles, and he's survived more fights than some knights. People bet on how long the dogs will last, how many teeth the bear still has. It's cruel, sure, but it's also popular. Taverns offer more variety. Some nights it's just a lute player in the corner singing about lost love or plague dreams. Other times it's a full-on performance, comedy, morality play, or bawdy farce involving pigs, wigs, and the occasional wildly inaccurate portrayal of a Frenchman. You don't always understand the jokes, but you laugh anyway, because everyone else is, and it's good to feel something other than tired. You meet a performer named Tomkin in one of these taverns. He's a lanky man with more teeth than wisdom and a voice like worn leather. He juggles knives, sings songs with 100 verses, and claims to have once made a bishop weep from laughter. He also sleeps in a stable loft and eats mostly onion stew. We all got our acts, he tells you with a wink. Yours is hammers, mine stories, same coin, different to shine. Sometimes you help him carry props, wooden swords, painted masks, a pair of absurdly large trousers. In exchange, he teaches you a few tricks. How to catch a thrown apple, how to fake a punch, how to distract a crowd just long enough for someone else to sneak a meat pie. Not that you ever do that, but it's good to know. There's a secret language among entertainers, a kind of code that helps them pass messages, identify friendly taverns, or warn each other about crooked constables. You learn a bit of it, enough to recognise when a show's about to turn risky or when someone in the crowd isn't just there for the jokes. Not all performances are welcome. A song too sharp, a puppet that looks too much like the mayor. Those things can get you fined, flogged, or worse. The line between performer and outlaw is thinner than most people think. And for some, it's the same line. There are stories of thieves posing as minstrels to scout rich houses, of tricksters who charm coins from the crowd one minute and disappear with someone's purse the next. Tomkin claims he once escaped the stocks by singing a ballad so sad the guard let him go out of pity. You suspect it's a lie, you also suspect it worked. And then there are the miracle plays. These are bigger affairs, staged by guilds, performed during feast days or special festivals. You see one in the shadow of St. Paul's, a retelling of Noah's Ark featuring live animals, an enormous wooden boat on wheels, and a man playing God with a booming voice and a questionable beard. The crowd loves it. Children shriek, women gasp, and the players soak in the adoration like sun. It's religion and theatre mashed together with just enough chaos to keep everyone on their toes. Historians often debate whether medieval entertainment was frivolous or fundamental. Some dismiss it as escapism, bread and sick circuses for a population worn thin by hardship. Others argue that it was essential, a way for people to process fear, mock authority, find joy, and feel, just for a little while, like their lives were something more than endless work. After watching a puppet show where the devil steals a bishop's wig and gets brained with a turnip, you start to think they might be right. A quirky fact, the word histrionic, which now means overly dramatic, comes from histrio, the Latin word for actor. It was often used with suspicion in the Middle Ages. Actors were considered dangerous by some, though. They could impersonate nobles, impersonate clergy, impersonate you. Their lies were entertaining, yes, but also a little too convincing. In some cities they weren't allowed to be buried in consecrated ground. Perform for the people, die outside the walls. Still they keep performing, because the people keep watching. You learn to appreciate these off hours more and more. Even if you can't spare a coin, you find yourself lingering near corners where someone's singing or telling a tale. You laugh at the same jokes twice, let the rhythms carry you to sleep. You hum verses while hauling iron or scrubbing soot from your boots. And every once in a while, when the crowd is cheering and the firelight flickers just right, you let yourself forget, just for a moment, how hard everything is. You don't think about your next meal or the frost creeping into your bones. You don't worry about guilds or taxes, or Hal's ever-growing list of tasks. You just listen, you just laugh, you just live. And that, in this city, is the finest trick of all. It happens so fast you don't even realise it's trouble until you're standing ankle-deep in it. One moment, you're handing over a batch of chain links to a local watchman outside the fish market. The next, he's frowning at the workmanship, calling it thin, and threatening to report Hal to the Armourers Guild. You try to explain, gently, that it's just reinforcement, not full mail, and that Hal isn't trying to pass it off as battlefield armour, but the man already smells a bribe opportunity, and before you can blink, he's got a hand on your shoulder and a fine on his lips. You're not fined, though, not exactly. You're charged. With something vague and absurd like dishonest trade practice or improper display of wares, and you're marched to a holding pen near Guildhall, where you're left stewing behind wooden slats while a bailiff decides if you're worth his time. You spend half the afternoon there, wedged between a loud drunk who insists he's the king's cousin and a boy accused of selling counterfeit onions. It's not scary exactly, but it is humiliating and boring, mostly boring. This, you learn, is what happens when you violate one of the many, many laws that govern trade and behaviour in medieval London. They don't teach them to you, you don't memorise them from a scroll, you just learn them the hard way, by accidentally breaking one and hoping the punishment doesn't involve stocks, lashes, or boiling your fingernails off. You're released with a warning, and only because Hal shows up in person, greasing the bailiff's palm and threatening to lodge a complaint with the mayor's office. Next time, he says as you walk home, don't talk to anyone with feathers in their hat unless I'm there. You nod, but you're still confused. You didn't do anything wrong. That's when it clicks. It doesn't matter. In London, petty laws exist like weeds in a field everywhere, tangled, hard to spot until you're already stuck in them. There are laws against selling ale in unmeasured cups, laws against tipping chamber pots at the wrong time of day, laws about the colour of your boots if you're not of noble blood. You once saw a man nearly flogged for selling bread that was half an ounce too light. Another was fined for wearing fur above his station. Imagine that, your scarf being illegal. Sumptuary laws, they're called. Rules designed to control what people wear based on their class. You, for example, are not allowed to wear velvet, or silver buttons, or anything that makes you look wealthier than a common tradesman. If you somehow get your hands on a fine cloak and wear it into the wrong neighbourhood, expect to be stopped, questioned, and possibly stripped of it right there in the street. The city's obsessed with order, appearances, and knowing your place. If you step out of line even slightly, someone will notice, and someone else will make it their business to correct you. Some of these laws make sense, sort of. Yeah. You don't want spoiled meat in the market or poisoned ale at the tavern. But others, they feel like traps. You hear about a vendor fined for selling fish during Lent when it wasn't Friday, and another arrested for setting up her stall 2 feet too close to the church steps. It's not about morality, it's about control and money, mostly money. You learn to spot the enforcers, the beadles with their staves, the bailiffs with their scrolls, the constables who walk like the city belongs to them, and look at everyone like they're one bad sentence away from getting flogged, and worst of all, the informants, the ones who aren't in uniform but smile too much, ask too many questions, and vanish just before someone gets arrested. It makes you paranoid. You stop talking openly in the streets. You triple-check the weight of anything you sell. You whisper jokes instead of shouting them. And when someone bumps into you too hard, you check your pockets, then you check the shadows. Because if someone wants to make you guilty, they'll find a way. Historians often debate how effective medieval law enforcement really was. Some paint a picture of a well-regulated society with courts, systems of justice, and a watchful citizenry. Others describe it as a mess of corruption, vendettas, and arbitrary punishments meted out by whoever had the sharpest tongue or the largest stick. You're starting to believe it's both. There is order, but it's the kind of order that comes with strings and knots. You see someone sentenced to the pillory in the square outside St Dunstan's. He's a butcher, apparently caught selling spoiled pork. The crowd hurls vegetables, old bones, and one impressively accurate clump of dungs at his face. He takes it in silence, eyes blank. You wonder how much of that meat was really spoiled, and how much of the charge was just a rival's grudge backed up by a paid-off inspector. The fringe fact that makes you blink: there were laws prohibiting people from blowing their noses in public near certain churches. Disrupting the sanctity of the air, one scroll puts it. You laugh when you first hear it. Then you see a man scolded for sneezing too close to a bishop's cart. You stop laughing. So, you adapt. You learn to read people's body language, how to bow your head just right, how to mumble an apology in the exact tone that sounds remorseful without admitting guilt. You keep your paperwork, when you have any, dry and folded. You ask Hal for permission before selling even the simplest thing. It's exhausting, all the little ways you have to protect yourself from invisible rules. But you get better at it, and gradually the city starts to treat you like you belong. A constable nods at you instead of sneering. A beadle passes without questioning your boots. You haven't changed, really. You've just learned how to play their game. That night, you and Owen sit on the stoop behind Hal's shop, watching the sky darken and listening to the far-off sound of a lute. He tosses a pebble between his fingers and mutters, "Funny, innit? City punishes you for doing well and ignores you when you're starving." You do nod, because he's right. But you're not in the stocks. You're not in the pillory. You're not being chased through the alleys for selling bread that's a shade too brown. And in a place like this, that means you're doing just fine. The first time you volunteer for night watch, you do it out of curiosity. Maybe a little pride, too. You've been in London long enough now to know the rhythm of the streets by day, how the noise shifts with the sun, how the market calls swell like tide, how certain alleys reek worse than others depending on what's been dumped there. But night? That's a different animal. Hal raises an eyebrow when you tell him your plan, but he doesn't stop you. Just hands you a dented lantern and mutters, "Don't die." You don't plan to. Night in medieval London isn't the peaceful, quiet kind of night you might imagine. There's no soft moonlight glinting off polished rooftops, no star-filled skies to get poetic about. The smoke from 1,000 hearths clogs the air, and the flickering torches cast more shadows than they banish. The city doesn't sleep. It just mutters to itself in darker tones. You meet the watch captain near the Cripplegate. His name is Robin, and he's a man with one eye, a limp, and a laugh like crunched gravel. The rest of the watch is a ragged handful. Tradesmen, older apprentices, one retired sailor who smells permanently of onions. Most are armed with clubs or staves. One has a rusty sword he swears he knows how to use. You're given a wooden pole with an iron hook at the end. Not exactly comforting, but it'll do. Your job? Patrol a specific stretch of the city wall and its connecting streets. Look for fires, drunks, thieves, and anything that seems like it's about to go wrong. Sound the bell if something catches fire. Shout if someone gets stabbed. Otherwise, keep walking, keep watching, and try not to fall asleep. The first hour is uneventful. You pass shuttered shops and sleeping doorways, occasionally nodding to cats with better territory instincts than most humans. The city seems peaceful, almost gentle. A man is snoring beside a barrel. Someone's singing to themselves 2 floors up. You begin to relax. Then, around the corner near Bread Street, you hear it. Shouting. Loud, panicked, drunk shouting. You and another watchman, a lanky boy named Sim, rush to the scene and find 2 men wrestling in the mud over what appears to be a chicken. One man claims the bird is his dinner. The other insists it was his wife's dowry. The chicken, naturally, is squawking like it's being exercised. You separate them with some effort, threaten to take them to the stocks, and eventually they both slink off into different shadows. The chicken runs free. You feel weirdly proud. That's when you smell it. Smoke. Panic prickles your spine. You spin in a circle, sniffing, squinting into alleys. Sim sees it first, a thin trail of smoke leaking from beneath a shop door. You rush to it, pound the door, and when no one answers, you kick it open. Inside, a fire is blooming from an overturned candle, dancing across dry wood and hay like it's late for a feast. You shout for water. Sim bolts. You find a blanket and begin smothering the flames as best you can, coughing, eyes stinging. By the time the fire's out, thanks to 2 neighbours with buckets and a milk-soaked curtain, you're sweating, soot-covered, and deeply aware of how fast this city could vanish in flames. 1 ember. That's all it takes. No insurance, no fire brigade, no second chances. It's not fast fire of the night. Another building catches near the river just after midnight. You're not there for that one, but the rumours swirl fast. A drunk candlemaker, a spilled oil jug, 3 shops gone, 1 man lost his hand trying to drag out a barrel of fish. Better the hand than the house, someone mutters. You agree, but barely. London is a wooden city built too close together, warmed by fire and lit by flame. It's basically a tinderbox wearing a thatch hat. That's why the watch exists. You're not just guarding against crime, you're guarding against total destruction. And while people grumble about the curfew, about the bell that tolls when the gates are locked and everyone's supposed to go home, deep down they know why it's there. Still, people test the curfew constantly. You spot several wandering souls as the hours drag on. Lovers sneaking through alleys, gamblers leaving late-night dice games, workers too tired to care. You don't arrest anyone. You're not that kind of watchman. But you do escort one very drunk man back to his house after he insists the moon has been spying on him. He tells you tearfully that he once kissed a nun. You don't ask for details. There's a strange power to walking the streets while others sleep. You feel like a ghost or a shepherd. You see sides of the city that vanish by morning. Quiet courtyards, moonlit doorways, a fox slinking across a rooftop like it owns the world. You understand, finally, why some watchmen do this every night, even when they're paid in little more than bread and the vague promise of civic honour. Of course, not everyone sees the watch as noble. You hear stories, some of them too often to ignore, about watchmen who accept bribes to look the other way, or who rough up suspects just because they can. Some are drunk on duty, others are just tired and bitter. Sim tells you one captain was caught stealing from the houses he was supposed to protect. They broke 3 fingers, he says, and made him wear a sign that said "Trusted Thief." You never see that man, but you do spot a man in the tavern with oddly crooked hands. A fringe fact. In some parts of the city, night watchmen were required to carry lanterns with coloured glass, so people could identify which district they were from. Red for the north wall, green for the west, and so on. Not that you have coloured glass, just a cracked lantern and a half-melted candle. Still, it makes you feel official. By dawn, you're dead on your feet. Your back hurts. Your eyes feel full of ash. But you made it. You report to Robin, who gives a satisfied nod and says, "Didn't lose anyone. That's a good watch." You return to Hal's Forge in the pale grey light, where the air already smells like iron and charcoal. You collapse onto your usual mat and close your eyes. The city creaks and sighs around you, waking up again, unaware of everything you kept from burning down. And in that moment, soot-streaked and sore, you feel like you earned your keep. You barely have time to rest after your night on watch before the next knock comes. 3 sharp raps on the wooden frame of Hal's shop door. You open it to find a man in a brown cloak, one hand resting on the hilt of a curved knife, the other holding a scroll with the mayor's wax seal. He's not here for you. He's looking for Hal, but his eyes scan you like you might be carrying something contagious or valuable. Behind him stand 2 more men, and none of them look particularly patient. Hal emerges, wiping his hands on a soot-blackened rag. He reads the scroll, mutters a curse, and turns to you. "Get the kettle on. Visitors." His voice is flat, but his mouth is tight in that way you've come to recognise as serious. You make tea. The good kind, not the scrap-leaf stuff from the alley market, because these visitors are from the city council, and they want something that's not for sale. Information. It turns out there's been unrest. Again. Not war, not plague this time, though those are always floating in the air like fog, but suspicion. Tension. A little riot in the pot just beginning to bubble over. Someone spread rumours that foreign weavers are undercutting prices in the cloth market, and now half the city is on edge. People are whispering. Stallholders are sarlied at anyone who doesn't speak with the right accent. A Flemish dyer was chased from his stall just yesterday, his goods trampled and his name spat like a curse. It's not the first time this has happened. Not even close. Immigrants, foreigners, strangers, outsiders have long been part of London's lifeblood, weaving themselves into the city's endless patchwork. But they're easy targets when food runs short or wages drop. And now, it seems, the tension has reached your street. That afternoon you pass by a group of boys shouting insults at a man with dark hair and a wide-brimmed hat. They call him Flander Pig and throw stones. You step between them, more out of instinct than thought, and take a rock to the shoulder for your trouble. The man nods his thanks, barely. He doesn't speak much English. He disappears before you can ask his name. Later you hear whispers about Jewish moneylenders being blamed for a market downturn. It doesn't make sense. They've been banned from London for years, ever since Edward expelled them from the kingdom. But sense doesn't slow a rumour. Someone claims they saw a Hebrew letter scrawled on a merchant's door. Someone else says the well water's been cursed. You don't even have a well. You find yourself thinking about that man, the one with the wide-brimmed hat, and about Alice, the alewife, who once told you her grandmother came from Rouen with nothing but a sack of barley and a recipe for ginger beer, about the spice trader who gave you a taste of cinnamon once, grinning through broken teeth speaking 3 languages at once, about the girl with the silk ribbons who whispered her prayers in a tongue you'd never heard but still understood. Not all of them belong, not officially. Many live outside the city wall in Sauve or the Bishopsgate fringe. They build their homes where no one wants to look, pay higher prices, receive fewer protections. The guilds keep them out, unless they find a loophole. A few do. A few fight tooth and nail to earn their badge, their stall, their quiet right to exist in peace. But right now, peace is fragile. You see it start to fray during a market scuffle near Newgate. A local tanner throws a punch at a leatherworker from Lombardy, accusing him of stealing clients. The leatherworker barely speaks English, but his knuckles make a strong counter-argument. The watch steps in too late. By then, half the square is shouting and 3 stalls are in ruins. You pull a boy out of the crush before he's trampled. He's crying, clutching a broken toy horse. You hand it back to him. He hugs it like it's still whole. The next day, someone posts a note on the chapel door. English hands for English work. The letters are crude, carved into wood with a dagger tip. Hal reads it and spits. Idiots, he mutters. City's always needed more hands than it has. You ask him why people are like this, he shrugs. Blame's easier than fixing anything. Folks see strangers doing well and think it means they're doing worse. He gestures toward your workbench. But iron don't care who shapes it, long as the hammer's honest. There's a scholarly debate about how immigrants were treated in medieval London. Some historians point to records of foreign merchants being welcomed, even encouraged, for their skills and exotic goods. Others highlight riots, discriminatory taxes, and sudden expulsions. The truth, you suspect, lies in the city's constant tug-of-war between need and fear. A strange little fact. For a time, London required immigrants to wear badges showing their origin, coloured cloth stitched onto their sleeves, supposedly for identification, but in practice it marked them as other. Easy targets, easy scapegoats. You've never worn one, but today you start to understand what it must feel like. Tilda, the boatwoman, tells you she once ferried a family of Flemish weavers across the Thames in the dead of night. Paid double, told not to ask questions, she says they were crying, clutching bags of thread and paper. You ask where they went. She just shakes her head. Away. You try not to take sides. Not publicly. You still need to earn, and business doesn't like moral entanglements. But when a vendor mutters something hateful, you don't laugh. And when the foreign dye seller in the alley behind Hal's offers you a coin to deliver a message, just a simple note, no mystery, you say yes. You don't read it. You don't need to. As dusk falls, you walk home through streets that feel tight with tension. Usual noise is still there. Carts, bells, children shouting. But it's strained, like someone pulled a thread too far. You see guards posted outside a few shops. Some vendors have shuttered early. Others look over their shoulders while counting coin. But in a window near Bishopsgate, someone lights a lantern and hangs a piece of fabric beside it. A square of velvet embroidered with a red flower. Foreign stitchwork. Unmistakable. It's a quiet act, almost invisible. And in this city of elbows and shouting, sometimes that's the bravest kind of voice there is. It's hard to say when you stop noticing the weather and start fearing it, but somewhere between your 3rd frozen night and your 5th pair of soaked-through boots, you realise that surviving medieval London has less to do with work and more to do with what the sky decides to throw at you that day. Rain, sleet, fog, wind, none of it cares if you've got somewhere to be, if your bread needs baking, or if your roof's more hole than roof. And there's no comfort in a forecast. There is no forecast. Just clouds gathering and people muttering about bad omens or angry saints. Today, it's rain. Not a polite drizzle, or even a dramatic thunderstorm. Just a steady, soul-draining pour that flattens the city and soaks you to the bone. You wake to it tapping against the shutters, a sound like fingers drumming on a coffin lid, and you know before you even sit up that your clothes are going to be wet within minutes of stepping outside. Hal says nothing when you groan, just throws you your cloak and a pair of wooden clogs. If you lose a shoe in the mud again, I ain't fishing it out. The streets are worse than usual. Everything turns to sorry. Dirt, horse dung, yesterday's rotten fruit, all blending into a sticky. ankle-deep nightmare that somehow manages to smell even worse than it looks. Cartwheels stick, people slip, a goose squawks in protest as it's swept down a gutter, like some feathered, furious bar of soap. And of course no one stops moving. London doesn't shut down for rain. If it did, the whole city would have 3 working days a year. You're sent to fetch coal from a merchant near the river, but his barge was late. He shrugs, says the tide's wrong, or the rope snapped, or the ferryman drowned. He's not sure exactly. You wait under a dripping awning with a group of other poor souls, all of you soaked, all pretending you don't notice. One woman sells hot chestnuts from a brazier and you buy a handful, mostly for the heat. You burn your tongue on the first one and consider it worth it. People around you grumble about the usual, the price of firewood, the mould creeping into their boots, the stone cutter who slipped on a wet step and broke his back. Should have stayed in bed, someone mutters. But no one can stay in bed, not unless they're rich enough to afford servants and a house with real insulation. You're not. So you're out here, every day, battling wind and cold like it's just another part of the job. Then there's the fog. London fog isn't a gentle mist. It's a smothering yellowish blanket that smells like chimney smoke and river rot, and makes the city feel like it's melting into itself. You get lost walking from one end of the bridge to the other, convinced you've taken a wrong turn until you bump into the same fishmonger for the 3rd time. He recognises you and laughs. "You owe me now," he says. "That's 3 greetings, next one's a tax." Historians often romanticise foggy London streets, the lanterns glowing softly, the footsteps echoing through mist. But to you, there's nothing romantic about it. It makes you vulnerable. You can't see who's following you, or where the carts are, or whether the shadow in the alley is a person, a stray dog, or just the remains of a collapsed chimney. You learn to walk slowly, listen carefully, and keep one hand near your belt at all times. And then there's the cold. When it sets in, and it does set in, it clings to you like a curse. Your fingers stop working properly, your joints ache. You spend your nights curled beside the forge, praying Hal doesn't wake you with his usual elbow to the ribs. On the worst nights, your breath freezes in the air. The forge takes longer to heat up in the mornings, and even Hal's temper seems sluggish. He just grunts instead of swearing. You learn tricks to survive. Stuff straw in your boots, rub goose fat on your feet, wrap linen around your ears. One of the washerwomen swears by hot onion broth and 2 pairs of socks, but she also thinks the moon controls toothaches, so you take it with caution. There's a fringe belief that a warm stone placed under your bedding can chase away not just the cold, but spirits. You try it once. It helps with your toes, at least. Whether the ghosts leave or not, you don't much care. The worst, though, is when the weather destroys your work. Rain rusts tools, moisture warps wood. Lime won't set properly when it's too damp, and ink runs if it's even slightly humid. You once spent 3 hours copying a list of tools for Hal's records, only for the parchment to smear into nothing when a drip from the ceiling hit it. He yelled. You didn't argue, you just rewrote it. Slower this time, under a towel. Scholars often argue whether climate really affected urban productivity in medieval times. Some say people just worked through it, wrapped in cloaks and determination. Others point to missed harvests, sluggish building schedules, and frostbite as proof that weather could bring entire trades to a halt. In your case, the weather is the boss, you just try to stay on its good side. You once saw a man walk straight into a frozen puddle and disappear waist-deep in black water. He emerged cursing, shoes gone, hair plastered to his face. The crowd laughed. He did not. Neither did you. You helped him out, handed him a cup of cider later that night. He still limps. On especially miserable days, you fantasize about summer, about dry ground, about not having to wring out your sleeves just to eat. But then you remember summer brings heat, smell, flies, and a different kind of suffering. London seasons are not kind, they just change the rules. By the time you return from your errand, you're soaked, bruised from a fall, and your boots squelch with every step. Hal says nothing. He just points to a cloth by the fire. You strip off your cloak, wrap yourself in it, and sit down hard on the floor. Outside, the wind moans like something wounded. Inside, the forge crackles. Your fingers thaw one at a time. You don't speak. You don't need to. You're still here. And in a city that likes to test your resilience one raindrop at a time, that counts for something. You didn't think it'd be your toe that did you in, but there it is, swollen, angry red, and pulsing with the kind of pain that makes you reconsider every decision you've ever made, including being born. It started as a splinter. just a little sliver of wood from the coal crate, barely noticeable. But after a day of walking through mud, sleeping in damp socks, and pretending it didn't hurt, you wake to find your toe hot, stiff, and the colour of spoiled cherries. Hal takes one look at it and says flatly, "You'll want the barber surgeon." You blanch. Barber and surgeon don't belong in the same breath, let alone the same human. But you're in no position to argue. London doesn't have hospitals the way you might hope. There are infirmaries attached to religious houses, St. Bartholomew's is the big one, but if you're not dying or bleeding out in a dramatic fashion, you're on your own. And that means barber surgeons, the cheerful psychopaths of medieval medicine, who will happily shave your beard, pull your tooth, and remove your infected toe, all while humming a hymn and maybe drinking from the same basin they wash your wound in. You limp to one in the heart of Eastcheap, guided by a boy who claims he gets a penny per patient delivered. You believe him. He walks fast, whistling all the way, and deposits you in a crowded stall that smells like boiled wine, sweat, and something recently deceased. The man inside has a clean apron, though clean here just means only partially stained, and a set of tools laid out like he's about to carve a roast. "You've waited too long," he says brightly, inspecting your foot. "Festering nicely. That's good. Easier to tell what's dead and what's not." You don't like where this is going. He offers you wine. You accept. It's warm and tastes faintly of nails, but it dulls the edges of your panic. He cleans the area with what might be vinegar, sprinkles something sharp-smelling to cross your skin, and then gets to work with a blade that looks more like a whittling knife than anything surgical. You try not to scream. You fail, but you do manage not to kick him in the face, which apparently makes you a gentle patient. There's a short applause from someone waiting behind you. You're not sure if it's sarcastic. Afterwards, he wraps your toe in a linen scrap soaked in a mix of honey, herbs, and what you swear is mustard. He tells you to rest, avoid walking, and keep it clean. You nod. Then he charges you more than you've earned all week. You hand over half your coin and promise to work off the rest. He nods. "Come by tomorrow. We'll check for rot." You limp out, clutching your bandaged foot and your remaining pride, and shuffle home in the kind of awkward, tilted hobble usually reserved for cursed sailors and chimney sweeps who've lost a bet. Hal doesn't laugh when he sees you. Not out loud, anyway. But he does let you sit by the fire without complaint. Progress. The truth is, everyone in London deals with medical problems like this. No one's fully healthy. Coughs linger. Backs ache. Teeth rot and fall out like leaves in autumn. If you've made it to 25 without losing a finger or a tooth, you're probably part wizard. You see people walking with crutches made of chair legs, women with twisted hands from years of spinning, men missing ears, noses, sometimes half a jaw. No one asks, no one comments, they just nod, like to say, "Still here? Good, keep going." There are healing women too, unofficial of course. You meet one named Elspeth when Alice sends you to fetch a tincture for a cough that won't quit. Elspeth works out of a cramped back room, filled with bundles of drying herbs, jars of mysterious liquids, and a cat who watches you like it knows your sins. She's not a midwife, not exactly, but she knows what teas make you sleep and what poultices stop a wound from turning sour. Her hands are calloused, her voice low and steady. You ask her once if she's ever been accused of witchcraft. She smiles. Not yet, but give it time. There's a fringe belief among some of the city's poor that powdered mummy, yes, actual mummified human remains, is good for curing everything from broken bones to toothaches. It's sold in tiny doses at apothecary stalls, usually ground so fine it looks like cinnamon. You stare at it once, long and hard, before deciding to stick with the mustard poultice. Probably less haunted. You also learn that leeches aren't just a punchline, they're used seriously for draining bad blood. Some barber surgeons keep jars of them wriggling behind the counter. You're never quite sure if they're for healing or intimidation. One boy swears by them. Another says his cousin used leeches for a boil, and now only has half a leg. It's hard to tell what's truth and what's folklore. Scholars argue about how effective medieval medicine really was. Some say it was advanced for its time, based on careful observation, a growing understanding of anatomy, and the occasional miracle herb. Others say it was little more than guesswork, superstition, and good luck dressed up in Latin. You've seen both. You've also seen a man try to cure his headache by drilling a hole in his own skull. He survived. The headache did not. You recover slowly. Your toe stays swollen for 3 days, then gradually shrinks down to a dull ache. You try to rest, but rest is expensive. Hal lets you sharpen tools and stoke the forge, jobs that don't require standing. When you finally take off the bandage, the skin underneath looks like something that belongs in a stew. But it's intact. No rot, no smell. You count it as a win. You thank the barber surgeon next time you pass his stall. He doesn't remember you, just asks if you're bleeding. You say no. He shrugs. Come back when you are. That night you sit by the fire, whole enough to feel grateful. Your toe still throbs, but you're upright, mostly clean, and you've learned something important. In London, survival isn't just about work or luck, it's about maintenance. Patch the leaks, stitch the tears, clean the wound, wrap it tight, and tomorrow limp forward. You don't fall in love, not the swoon in the courtyard, poetry and pomegranates kind of love. You don't have the time or the clothes or the money for that. But you do start talking to Matilda. She sells candles in the corner of the Friday market, just under the old church arch where the pigeons gather. You see her every week, usually with wax on her sleeves and soot on her nose. Her candles are thin and crooked, clearly handmade, but they burn long and clean. You buy one once, mostly because you need light to read Hal's ridiculous supply list, and partly because she smiles at you like you're not a complete disaster. You go back the next week, and the week after that. At first, it's just talk. Weather, wax prices, jokes about customers who haggle for 10 minutes and still walk away empty-handed. But then you start walking her home. Her hands are always warm from candle moulds. She lives with her mother and 2 younger brothers in a cramped attic behind a baker's shop. You've never seen a room so full of wax drippings, half-melted stubs, and smells you can't quite identify. But it feels like a nest. Tight, warm, alive. Marriage is a topic that creeps up sideways in London. You don't propose with roses or ring boxes. You propose with questions like, what would you do if you had 2 beds? Or, do you think 3 loaves could feed 5? There's no grand declarations, just practicality and timing. Because for the poor, love might be a luxury, but partnership is survival. Matilda talks like someone who's done the math. She tells you how many candles she needs to sell per week to buy flour, how much her brothers cost in shoe leather, how fast wax prices drop if it rains on a saint's day. She doesn't complain, she calculates. And that's the moment you realise she might just be the smartest person you know. Still you hesitate. Because marriage is a big leap. It means sharing more than a bed. It means sharing your food, your debts, your future. And in this city, the future is always wearing a crooked smile and hiding a knife behind its back. You ask Hal about it one night between hammer blows. He doesn't look up. If she keeps you from starving and stealing, marry her. You ask if he's ever been married. He snorts. Once. She ran off with a Cooper. Best decision either of us ever made. You take your time, but eventually you ask Matilda the only way you can. Do you want to combine candle wax and soot? She blinks, then she laughs, and then she nods. It's not a wedding, really. Not by noble standards. You don't have a feast or matching garlands, or guests in velvet tunics. You have a priest who smells like pickled onions and a borrowed goblet of cider. Matilda wears a ribbon in her hair, and you wear your least holy shirt. Her brothers throw handfuls of barley in the air. It's itchy, but festive. Alice makes a stew. Hal grumbles something that might be a blessing. That night, you sleep on the same mat you've always used, just with company now. Marriage isn't easy, nothing in London is. You fight sometimes, over coin, over chores, over who left the window open during a rainstorm that flooded your entire candle stash. But there's comfort in not being alone, in knowing someone else has your back when the forge is slow, or when your toe flares up again, or when the roof starts dripping in 3 places instead of 2. Matilda's business picks up. People like her candles. They are cheap, yes, but also reliable. And in this city, reliable is better than holy. She teaches you to pour wax without burning your fingers. You teach her how to sharpen a knife using Hal's favourite whetstone. She likes the work. You like watching her like the work. Some nights you both collapse in a heap and laugh at nothing for 10 straight minutes. Marriage is also protection. Legally, a married couple has more status than 2 single workers. You can claim rights to your shared room. You can pass on property, even if all you own is a pile of wax and some tongs. It's easier to argue with officials when you can say my wife or our trade. People listen differently. The city respects a household more than it respects individuals. 2 heads, 2 hands, 1 unit. It's strange, but it works. There's an open scholarly debate on whether marriage in the medieval working class was about love or necessity. The answer, you've decided, is yes, both. Maybe one starts the fire and the other keeps it burning. You might not sing songs to each other or write sonnets, but you build something, together. That counts for more than rhymes. A quirky fact Matilda tells you one night while making tea. In some parts of the countryside, people were considered married if they just lived together and called each other husband and wife. No church, no priest. Hand fasting, she says, 1 year and a day. If you're still alive and still talking after that, you're in. You like the sound of that. Low pressure. Honest. You don't mark anniversaries, you don't have time, but you do measure things in candles now. Since we poured the big one, or after the triple batch failed, you measure things in shared meals and mended socks, in how long it takes to walk from the forge to her stall, in the way she taps you on the shoulder when you're daydreaming too close to a cart. You learn to lean on each other, so on cold nights you share warmth. On bad days you share coin. You laugh when one of you coughs up dust soot. You cry once, quietly, when a neighbour's house burns and nothing is left but ash and one melted candlestick. Matilda gives her one of yours. Doesn't ask, just does it. You're not rich, you never will be, but you're not alone now. You know her footsteps on the stair. You know how she hums when she's pouring wax. You know how her fingers fit in yours, even when both of you are too tired to speak. In medieval London, the streets are cold, the work is endless, and tomorrow is never promised. But at the end of it, you go home, to warmth, to her, to a room that smells like beeswax and bread and maybe, just maybe, hope. It starts with the cough. Not yours this time, Matilda's. A soft, dry rasp at first, the kind you barely notice. She brushes it off, says it's the candle soot or the chill coming in from the window. But it lingers, then it deepens. One morning, while you're fixing the roof with Hal's second-best hammer, you hear her hack so hard she drops a whole tray of freshly moulded candles. You're off the roof before the hammer hits the floor. She insists she's fine. She smiles, but the colour has already begun to drain from her cheeks. Her hands are colder than usual. The city is always full of coughs, of course. It's hard not to breathe in sickness when every alley is an open sewer, and every tavern is a fog of breath and beer. Still, this feels like something more, and you start to worry. Matilda doesn't. She keeps working, stubborn as a cart stuck in the mud. But you start making quiet visits, to the healer, to the priest, to Elspeth. You fetch herbs, warm broth and prayers. You stoke the fire higher at night, and you wrap her feet in the good wool. You tell yourself it's just a winter illness, it will pass. But one night as you're sitting by the fire, her head on your shoulder, she tells you she's written something down. Just in case, is how she says. You freeze. It's a will, a tiny one, barely more than a scrap of parchment, folded 6 ways, smudged with wax and tears. It leaves her candle moulds to her youngest brother, her apron to you, and, if such a thing could ever matter, her spot in the Friday market to whoever needs it next. You ask her why she's written it. She says softly, because you never know. And she's right. In medieval London, death is a constant background character, not always centre stage, but always waiting in the wings, patient as mould. People die of fevers, of infected wounds, of childbirth, of a cold that settles in the chest and never leaves. They die in accidents, in riots, under carts, or simply in their sleep. There's no guarantee of a tomorrow, not even if you're young, hard-working and careful. Maybe especially not then. You think of all the people you've seen vanish from your little corner of the city. The boy who used to sing for coins at the corner of Ironmonger Lane. Gone, carted off one morning like discarded fruit. The old man with the one-eyed cat who sold salted herring. Missing for weeks, then found slumped behind the bathhouse. Even Hal once went silent for a whole day, staring at nothing, after learning that his brother's son had drowned when a barge tipped near Wapping. And yet, despite all this, most people have wills. Tiny ones, scrawled on old parchment or muttered to a priest. Because in a world so unpredictable, the only power you really have is deciding where your few things go when you leave. You write one too. It takes you longer than it should. You sit by the forge one evening, charcoal smudging your fingers, and try to think what matters. Your spare boots go to Owen. Your little stash of coins, hidden under the 3rd floorboard, goes to Matilda, if she's still around. If not, to her brothers. You even leave Hal your whetstone, though you suspect he'll scoff and claim his is better. And then, as an afterthought, you write, "To whoever finds this, take care of her stall. She lit more than candles." You fold it, seal it, and tuck it under your bedding. You hope no one finds it soon. There's a scholarly debate about how common formal wills really were among the working class. Some argue they were mostly a luxury of merchants and landowners, those who had enough to divide, but others point to parish records filled with simple bequests passed by word of mouth, scribes or trusted neighbours. Even the poorest might leave a spoon, a shawl, or a piece of advice. A last trace. Matilda gets better, slowly. Her cough fades like mist, and then the colour creeps back into her cheeks. You don't know what did it. Elspeth's tinctures, the prayers, or just plain luck. Maybe all three. You never ask, she never says, but the parchment remains folded in her apron pocket. Yours stays under the floorboard. You start to look at your possessions differently after that. Not like treasures, but like clues, like echoes. What story would your boots tell? Your tools? Your scribbled notes in the back of Hal's ledger? Would anyone remember the time you patched the forge roof in a hailstorm? Would they know about the way Matilda sings when she works, low and off-key? You hear about a city clerk who died suddenly, and when they cleaned out his things, they found a tiny puppet theatre in a box under his cot. No one knew he performed in secret late at night, for the orphans 2 streets over. That was his legacy, not the accounts he kept, not the records, but the stories he made. One afternoon you help Matilda write out a cleaner version of her will. She adds new lines, candle recipes, a list of customers who still owe her coin, and a reminder to never mix tallow with beeswax unless you enjoy explosions. You both laugh at that, but you both take it seriously. The city doesn't mourn publicly for people like you. There's no parade, no bell tolling 15 times in your honour. Maybe your neighbours remember your face, maybe not. But you do what you can. You leave something behind. A note, a skill, a memory. There's a quirky custom you learn from a chimney sweep named Tom. When someone dies without a will, their belongings are sometimes divided by a dice roll among the neighbours. It's frowned upon, of course, technically illegal, but Tom claims it's fair. The gods love a gamble, he says, throwing a pair of chicken bones onto the table. One shows a painted eye. The other cracks in half. Means yes, he mutters. Probably. You keep the will updated after that. Add to it once a month, like a strange journal. Sometimes it's a serious entry. The green cloak goes to Tilda if she loses hers again. Sometimes it's nonsense. Whoever finds this, beware the loose stone near the latrine, she bites. It becomes your way of saying, I was here, quietly. And as time goes on, you notice others doing the same. Alice tells you where her favourite ladle is hidden. Owen whispers which alley to avoid if you don't want your shoes stolen by raccoons. Not even a joke, somehow. Hal mutters one day while half asleep, if I die, burn the ledger. I don't want to be remembered as someone who charged full price for bent nails. You smile. You won't forget. Because legacy in this place isn't gold or land or names carved in stone. It's what people carry with them after you're gone. A recipe, a tool, a good joke, a half-sung melody, a will scratched onto the back of a candle invoice. You're still alive, still walking, still breathing soot and sweating through cold nights, but now you're also leaving breadcrumbs, tiny markers that say, yes, I was here, and I tried. And that, in a city so good at forgetting, might just be enough. You're in the crowd when it happens, not by choice exactly, but by the slow, shuffling force of curiosity and the fact that crowds in London pull you in like whirlpools. One moment you're buying turnips, the next you're pressed between a sweating fishmonger and a cooper's apprentice, craning your neck to see what everyone's staring at. You think it's a bear baiting at first, or maybe someone's puppet show has caught fire again. But no, this is something else. This is politics. In the centre of the square a man is shouting. Not selling, not preaching, shouting. He's standing on a barrel waving a stained cap in the air, his face flushed with the kind of fury that comes from weeks of chewing on a grievance like it's a tough cut of meat. They tax us to death, he cries. They raise the levies, the rents, the price of salt, and what do we get? Mud, rot, and broken backs. The crowd roars. You don't join in, but you don't leave either. This is a protest. Not the kind with banners and chants. This is raw. Owd. A knot of workers, apprentices, porters, widows, everyone tired of paying more for less. The man speaks well, in that half-drunk, dangerously clear way that makes you nod before realising what you've agreed to. They take from our bowls to fill their tables, he yells. When will London belong to us? Someone throws a stone not at the speaker but in agreement. Then another. Then a loaf of bread that's clearly not fresh. It escalates fast. Always does. Someone grabs a constable's hat. Someone else tips a vendor's cart. The shouts twist, souring into chaos. The speaker vanishes, swallowed by bodies. And then the mayor's men arrive. That's when you leave. You've seen this before, or heard about it. These little uprisings flare up every few years like bad joints in the winter. Most fizzle out after a few arrests, maybe a hanging, to remind everyone who's in charge. Others catch fire, figuratively and sometimes literally, and leave streets scorched and names banned from polite conversation. You limp home the back way thinking about what the man said, about taxes, about prices, about ownership. Because here's the truth. You work, you sweat, you serve, and still you don't really own anything. Not your street, not your trade, not even your name if someone richer decides they want it in court. Every inch of the city is owned, leased, taxed, or claimed. You rent your life by the week. Take Hal's Forge, he doesn't own the building. He rents it from a merchant who inherited it from his uncle, who bought it during a fire sale 30 years ago. If the rent goes up, Hal grits his teeth and pays it. If it goes too high, he packs up and finds a worse corner of town and the city doesn't blink. It just replaces him with a new tenant and keeps humming. Then there's tolls. Want to bring goods into the city? Pay a gate toll. Want to sell at the market? Pay a stall fee. Want to cross London Bridge with a full cart? That's another toll. Even the Thames demands coin, port taxes, mooring fees, bribes for dock space. You joke once that it costs more to breathe in London than it does to leave. Alice doesn't laugh. The city is built like a labyrinth of invisible hands, each one reaching into your pocket with surprising flexibility. And if you can't pay, you disappear. Quietly. No headlines. Just another vacant stall or unoccupied dwelling that someone else will fill. You once saw a man dragged before a magistrate for refusing to pay the full tax on his firewood. He argued loudly that he had already paid twice that week. The magistrate smiled, handed him a fine he couldn't afford, and when the man protested, sentenced him to public labour. You helped clean up the alley where he shoveled waste for 2 weeks straight. You never asked if he was cold at night. You knew the answer. There's a scholarly debate about whether medieval taxation was oppressive or just mismanaged. Some say it was necessary, a way to fund city maintenance, defence, public goods. Others argue it was a patchwork of outdated customs, fees invented on a whim, and loopholes only the rich could find. You don't care about the theory. You care that Matilda has to choose between wax and grain sometimes, that Owen once sold his belt just to pay a stall fee, that your tools are taxed, but the constable's sword is not. A strange but true fact, in some wards, the poorest residents were technically exempt from certain taxes because it wasn't worth the paperwork to collect from them. But if you showed even the smallest signs of success, a new tunic, a better stool, a few extra loaves, you were suddenly eligible. In success, you became visible, and in visibility, you became liable. You start to see resistance in small places, a cart blocking a toll road by accident, a vendor underweighing bread to offset stall fees, a coin dropped in the wrong hand, nothing grand, just survival. You see it in yourself too. You start walking around certain tolls, you stop correcting customers when they overpay by a penny. You pretend not to see when a coal boy pockets half his load and swears the rats took the rest. But even resistance costs something, because the city notices, always, one wrong move and the invisible hands become fists. You pass by the square again 2 days later. The man who spoke isn't there. No one will say what happened to him, but the barrel he stood on is gone, and the wall behind it has been whitewashed. Clean, bland, empty. Erased. You wonder if he had a will. Matilda doesn't talk much about taxes. She's too busy counting candles, weighing wax, budgeting for broth. But one night she looks up and says, "Do you think they ever think about us?" You shake your head. They don't have to. That's the part that stings, not just the cost, but the invisibility. You're essential to the city's function. You build it, feed it, warm it, clean it. And yet you're treated like a weed, useful in small doses, choked when too many of you bloom. Still, you don't riot. Not yet. You keep your head down, you pay what you must, you grumble, you help others when you can, you carry your work like armour, your anger like a secret. Because for now, that's what survival looks like. But you keep the speaker's words in your pocket. Not literally, you're not a fool, but in your head, turned over, replayed, whispered sometimes when no one's listening. When will London belong to us? Not today, but maybe one day. And then, one morning, you wake up to birdsong, actual birdsong, not the crows tearing at garbage or pigeons flapping like feathered goblins, but songbirds, clear and insistent, warbling into the cold spring air as if they have just invented sound. You blink in confusion because London isn't usually so gentle. You sit up on your straw mat and listen. There's no shouting yet, no dogs barking, no anvils clanging, just a faint breeze, and the sound of something beginning again. It's not a holiday, though it feels like one. Matilda stretches beside you and yawns, her fingers still stained with wax from last night's late batch. You both take a moment before standing. No rush, no emergency, just a strange and welcome pause in the city's usual shriek of demands. Outside, the street is still damp from rain, but not muddy. The gutters haven't overflowed. The air is crisp, not choking. You half expect something terrible to happen, just to balance it all out. But nothing does. You fetch water, you help Matilda gather candles, you open the forge with Hal, who shockingly says good morning instead of just grunting. Owen is humming. Alice waves from her window with 2 loaves cooling on the sill. Even the sky looks confused by its own softness. It doesn't last, of course. It never does. By midday, someone spills fish guts in the alley and slips on them. 2 carts crash into each other near Cheapside. And a dispute over turnip weights turns into a fistfight in the butter market. But for a few hours, there's peace. And in a city like this, a few hours can feel like a small lifetime. You take the long way home, walking hand in hand with Matilda, weaving through narrow lanes where the sun peeks through in slanted golden lines. You pass a boy learning to play a fiddle, an old woman selling violet crowns made from weeds, a man chalking something onto a wall in a language you don't recognise. You think about the time you arrived, how heavy the city felt, how lost you were, how loud everything was, and how small you felt trying to carve out a place. You remember freezing nights, your toe infection, your first scolding from Hal. You remember long days of sweeping, hammering, hauling, of counting coins one by one and pretending you weren't afraid. You also remember laughter, and warm bread, and dancing in the square the night someone brought out a drum and a stolen bottle of brandy. You remember the first time Matilda called you stubborn in a useful way. You remember helping the candle moulds cool in the early hours, and the strange joy of seeing them come out clean and whole. You've seen London at its worst. Fires, sickness, riots, laws that squeeze your throat, taxes that bleed you slow, but you've also seen the strange kindnesses that grow like moss in its corners, quiet, persistent, overlooked. The way people pass bread behind backs. How neighbours hold space for grief without needing to ask why. The way children laugh even when they're barefoot and hungry. And you've learned to survive, not by rising above it all, but by sinking into it, becoming part of it, letting the city shape you while holding on to the little pieces that are still yours. Your hands, your humour, your name. There's a scholarly theory that London in the medieval period was a machine. Complex, mechanical, designed to keep moving no matter who got caught in its gears. Maybe that's true. But you don't feel like a cog anymore. You feel like a bone in the frame. Not replaceable, not decorative, just necessary. Quietly necessary. You spend your evening in the square, sitting on the low wall by the dried-up fountain. Matilda counts coins. You count footsteps. A minstrel sings a song about a knight who fell in love with a goose, you don't ask, and someone hands you a meat pie with only 2 bites missing. You eat it without hesitation. That's just how things work here. Tomorrow will be harder. It always is. A new tax might drop, the forge might break, rain might flood the street again. But for tonight, the city hums like a lullaby. Low, off-key, but somehow comforting. Before bed, you tuck your latest will update under the mat. If I die tomorrow, give my boots to Owen. He's always eyeing them. You chuckle. Matilda tells you to stop tempting fate. You fall asleep with the window cracked open, letting in the breeze and the last traces of songbird music. The forge's heat lingers just enough to keep the cold at bay. Your fingers ache, your back is sore, but you've made it through another day. You're not rich, you're not famous, you're not even clean, most of the time. But you are fed. You're housed. You're loved. And in medieval London, that's the highest kind of living there is. And now, here you are, 30 days and 30,000 words later, lying in a room that smells like smoke and beeswax, with your boots by the fire, your hands a little calloused, and your name stitched into the seams of a city that barely noticed you arrive. You didn't become a master craftsman. You didn't strike it rich or earn a coat of arms or invent some new, clean way to tan leather without it smelling like misery. But you learned to make your way, and in this place that's its own kind of miracle. You came here expecting survival to be about muscle, coin, and maybe a few lucky breaks. But it wasn't. Not really. It was about noticing. Noticing when someone needed help lifting a barrel. Noticing which streets flood after rain. Noticing who to trust with a secret or a sore tooth, or the last corner of your last loaf. Survival in medieval London meant understanding rhythm. The toll of bells, the clatter of hooves, the rustle of coin changing hands, the hiss of wax cooling in a mould beside someone you chose to keep warm with. And you did survive. Sure, your back hurts. Your foot still flares up when it rains. Hal never did remember your name right, and you're pretty sure the constable still suspects you of something vague and unpaid. But you lasted long enough to learn what most don't. This city isn't meant to love you. But it might remember you, in the soft echo of boots across stone, in the faint scent of burnt wax, in the muttered joke passed down about a forge hand who once took a hammer to a cartwheel and accidentally built a stool. It's not much, but it's enough. So now, as the last embers die down and the sounds of London settle into that half-sleep murmur, close your eyes. You've earned a night with no shouting, no tolls, no aching limbs. Just stillness, just warmth, just the quiet assurance that when the morning bell rings again, you'll rise and do what you've always done. Step forward, shoulders square, hands steady. Because now you know how to live here.